I left the party earlier than expected to go home to my wife, but the moment I opened the bedroom door, my legs nearly gave out beneath me. My wife was kneeling on the freezing marble floor, blindfolded, trembling as she licked pieces of bread scattered across the ground. My son stood beside the fireplace and coldly told his wife, "Zoom in closer." Her face is what makes this worth watching. And in that exact moment, I realized the son I had raised all my life had lost the last piece of humanity left inside him. This story starts quietly, but it won't leave you unchanged. Before we begin, drop a comment for me. What are you doing while you listen? Working, driving, or winding down? Your perspective might be exactly what someone else needs today. Some details have been adapted for storytelling, but the message, the lesson is what I hope stays with you. At 72, I stood before 400 of Manhattan's most powerful people accepting an award 42 years in the making, while 15 blocks away, my son was torturing his own mother. The Plaza Hotel, grand ballroom stretched beneath me like a cathedral of ambition. 8-meter LED screens projected my face across 3 walls. A BC News live streamed every word to 17 million viewers. Senator Saxon smiled from the front row, carrying a 28-year debt I'd quietly buried using my FBI consulting clearance. Judge Upshaw shook his head with what looked like admiration, but was really 4 years of unproven suspicion. My attorney raised his bourbon glass and mouthed something about legacy. A Times investigative reporter sat 3 tables back with a recorder I wasn't supposed to notice. This empire was built on a simple principle, I told the crowd: protect what matters no matter the cost. 400 people rose to their feet. Then the encrypted device in my jacket pocket vibrated. 5 words from Thaddeus, my head of security for 3 decades. The show has begun. Return immediately. Real power isn't the ability to build empires. It's the ability to walk away from applause the moment your family needs you. I finished my remarks, shook hands, then slipped through the service exit, while cameras still panned the crowd and no one noticed the guest of honor had vanished. 11 minutes later, I entered our 47th floor penthouse. The marble floors were heated to 16 degrees Celsius, too cold for comfort, deliberate. I heard her before I saw her fingernails scraping stone, a small, desperate whimper, then silence. Through a 3-inch gap in the bedroom door, I saw everything. Edna, 68 years old, former Carnegie Hall concert pianist. A woman who once commanded audiences of 3,000 with Rachmaninoff's Third, was on her knees, blindfolded, using her mouth to search for bread scraps scattered across the freezing marble floor like bait for an animal. Sabine, my daughter-in-law, sat 12 feet away in the Milan chair with champagne in one hand and an iPhone recording close-up footage in the other. Perfect angles, she said. Lennox, my son 38, the heir I had groomed, stood by the fireplace reviewing footage on a tablet with the cold satisfaction of someone evaluating a successful experiment. The contrast is better here. She's framed against the bed she used to sleep in. That's the narrative. Narrative. They were building a story. My wife's suffering was content. Edna's blindfold had slipped slightly. Through it, I could see one eye clouded by the degenerative condition that had stolen 90% of her vision over 18 months. She'd told me she was adjusting. She'd told me Lennox and Sabine were helping her adapt. She'd told me everything was fine. I'd been told a lot of things. The device vibrated again. Thaddeus surveillance confirms 3 months of pattern, ready for phase 1. 3 months. This had been happening while I closed billion-dollar deals, shook hands with senators, built the empire I believed would protect them. How long should we let this run? Sabine asked. Lennox checked the Patek Philippe I'd given him for his 30th birthday. Another 20 minutes, then we moved to the next scenario. I stood in the shadows, fists clenched, until my palms tore. The most celebrated entrepreneur in America that night watched his wife, a woman who once played for presidents, crawl across freezing marble while their son documented her degradation with clinical precision. In 60 seconds, I would step from those shadows and speak 3 words that would change everything. Sabine leaned forward in the black leather chair and tapped her iPhone screen. The white Sonos Arc speaker on the dresser hummed to life. Then I heard my own voice echo through the bedroom speakers, perfect, flawless, unmistakably mine. And I realized my son hadn't just stolen my money. He'd stolen my identity to break his mother's soul. My love, the voice said. My voice, my exact cadence, my precise syntax, the slight Brooklyn rasp I'd never fully erased despite 42 years of corporate polish. They are holding me hostage. They will let me go the moment you comply. Do not use your hands. Eat every piece. Edna's entire body trembled. Tears soaked through the medical blindfold. Her hands, those beautiful pianist hands that had once performed Rachmaninoff for 3,000 people, pressed flat against the freezing marble as if trying to anchor herself to reality. She nodded. Then she lowered her face back to the floor and continued searching for scattered bread with her mouth. I stood in the shadows watching a deepfake so flawless, I almost questioned my own existence. Somewhere, someone had recorded hours of my voice, parsed my speech patterns, built an artificial intelligence clone precise enough to fool the woman who'd shared my bed for 44 years. Sabine adjusted her phone angle, capturing Edna's profile against the city lights bleeding through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The audio quality is perfect, she said to Lennox. We can use this for the primary leverage sequence. Leverage sequence? They had a plan. This wasn't rage. This wasn't sudden cruelty. This was infrastructure. Lennox set his tablet on the fireplace mantel and crossed his arms, studying his mother the way a museum curator studies a painting. How many iterations have we recorded? 17, Sabine replied, each one progressively more degrading. We'll escalate in stages. Week 1 establishes the baseline. Week 2 introduces the financial coercion. Week 3 triggers the asset transfer authorization. Week 3. They were working on a timeline. My wife's torture had a project schedule. The deepfake voice played again. I'm so proud of you, my love. You're saving my life. Just a little more. Don't stop now. Edna sobbed, but she didn't stop. Do you know what it means to hear your own voice, your exact cadence, your precise syntax, commanding the woman you love to destroy her own dignity? It's not anger you feel first. It's a kind of existential vertigo. For 3 seconds, I genuinely questioned whether I was standing in that doorway or whether I was somehow speaking those words from another dimension of hell. But I knew the truth. I'd known for 3 months. Thaddeus had discovered the first deepfake audio file on August 14th during a routine digital security audit. We'd spent 97 days building the counter operation, tracking every bank transfer, logging every co-conspirator, identifying every piece of leverage my son and his wife had assembled to dismantle my empire. And now watching my wife crawl across our bedroom floor while my synthetic voice praised her obedience, I understood the full architecture of their plan. They hadn't broken her with violence. They'd broken her with love. Edna believed I was in danger. She believed compliance would save my life. Every degrading act, every humiliation, every moment of suffering, she'd endured it all as an act of devotion. 44 years of marriage had taught her to trust my voice above all other sounds in the world, and they'd weaponized that trust into a tool of torture. Sabine took a long sip of champagne. Should we transition to the financial script? I want to test her response when we introduce the wire transfer language. Lennox checked his Patek Philippe. Not yet. Let's get another 10 minutes of the baseline degradation. The emotional contrast will be stronger when we pivot to the account access demands. Account access. There it was. The endgame. They weren't torturing Edna for sadistic pleasure. They were conditioning her, building a psychological profile of compliance, teaching her that obedience to my voice, even when that voice commanded the unthinkable, was the only way to keep me alive. And once that conditioning was complete, they'd play a new audio file. One where my voice calmly explained that the only way to secure my release was to authorize specific wire transfers, to sign specific documents, to grant specific access to accounts she'd been named trustee of in our estate structure. $2 billion filtered through the blind obedience of a woman who loved me enough to crawl. She believed I was in danger, and so she crawled. I felt something crack inside my chest. Not my heart that was still functioning, still pumping blood and rage and tactical clarity. What cracked was the last brittle shell of doubt about what I had to do next. Thaddeus had asked me 3 months ago, "How far are you willing to go?" I'd told him, however far it takes to destroy them completely. Now watching my son smile while my wife degraded herself to save a man who wasn't even in danger, I understood the true weight of that promise. The deepfake voice purred through the speakers one more time. "You're doing so well, my love. Just a little longer. I'll be home soon." Edna whispered something I couldn't hear. Her voice was so broken, so small, that even the premium microphones in Sabine's iPhone probably didn't capture it. But I knew what she'd said. She'd said, "I love you." I stepped from the shadows. 3 words, simple, declarative, Absolute. Stop it now. The room froze like a photograph. Sabine's champagne glass stopped halfway to her lips. Lennox's hand locked on his tablet. The deepfake voice cut mid-sentence, as someone, probably Sabine, hit pause with the reflexive panic of a child caught stealing. My son turned his head slowly, very slowly, the way you turn when you hear a sound that shouldn't exist. And for the first time in 38 years, I saw true terror in his eyes. Not the terror of being caught, not the terror of punishment or consequence or public exposure, the terror of realization. He looked at me, standing in that doorway. No surprise on my face, no shock, no confusion, and understood something far more dangerous than discovery. His old man had known all along. What Lennox and Sabine didn't understand yet was that I hadn't stumbled home early from a canceled flight. I hadn't walked in by accident. I had orchestrated this exact moment for 3 months, and every second of their torture had been documented, logged, and weaponized into the machinery that would destroy them both. I walked past my son as if he were a piece of furniture, not worth acknowledging, not worth addressing, and knelt on the freezing marble beside the woman who'd stood by me for 44 years. Lennox's mouth opened. Some explanation was forming. I didn't let him speak. I pulled the navy cashmere handkerchief from my tuxedo pocket and gently wiped Edna's face. Her skin was ice cold. Tears had soaked through the medical blindfold and tracked down her cheeks. "I'm here," I whispered. "I am safe. I have always been here." Her entire body went rigid. Then she collapsed into my arms, sobbing so hard I felt her ribs shaking against my chest. Behind me, Lennox found his voice. "Dad, you don't understand." I raised a single finger, didn't turn my head, didn't look at him. "Do not speak." The room went silent, except for Edna's broken breathing. I pulled my encrypted phone from my jacket and dialed Thaddeus. He answered before the first ring finished. "Phase 2, I said. "Confirmed," he replied. "Medical team is 3 minutes out." I looked down at Edna. Her hands clutched my tuxedo lapels with desperate strength, as if she was afraid I might disappear if she let go. "You're safe now," I told her. "I promise you this will never happen again." She nodded against my chest, but the sobbing didn't stop. 44 years of marriage had taught me the difference between tears of relief and tears of something broken that might never fully heal. These were the second kind. 2 women in medical scrubs appeared in the doorway. They helped Edna to her feet with professional gentleness. One removed the blindfold. The other wrapped a heated blanket around her shoulders. "Guest suite?" I said. "Full examination? Nothing gets documented outside our private medical system." The lead nurse nodded. Edna looked back as they guided her toward the door. Her eyes were unfocused. The degenerative condition had stolen most of her vision. She reached one hand toward me. "Don't leave," she whispered. "I'm not going anywhere, I promised. I just need to have a conversation with our son." The way I said that last word, "son," made Lennox flinch. Good. Once Edna and the medical team disappeared, I stood and brushed marble dust from my tuxedo pants. Lennox and Sabine remained frozen him by the fireplace, her in the leather chair. I walked past them without a word and headed toward my study. "Follow me," I said. It wasn't a request. My study occupied the northeast corner. Mahogany panels, floor-to-ceiling law books, and a desk that had belonged to my father before the Atlantic City bankruptcy took everything. I'd bought it back at auction in 1987 for $47,000. Best investment I ever made. I sat in my chair and gestured to the 2 seats across from the desk. Lennox and Sabine sat like defendants, awaiting verdict. Thaddeus entered behind them and closed the door. He took a position in the corner, silent, solid, exactly where I needed him. I opened my laptop and turned the screen so they could see. High-definition footage filled the display. Same bedroom, same marble floor, but the timestamp read 94 days ago. September 2nd, 2023. Edna on her knees, Sabine's voice off camera giving instructions, Lennox reviewing angles on his tablet. I clicked to the next file. September 9th, another session. September 16th, September 23rd, October 1st. 23 separate recordings. All cataloged, all time-stamped, all mirrored on an encrypted server in Zurich. Lennox's face went white. Sabine's carefully constructed mask. The M&A attorney who'd negotiated billion-dollar mergers. Without blinking, cracked just enough for me to see the calculation happening behind her eyes. How long had I known that's what the terror in Sabine's eyes was asking? "The camera is embedded in the bedroom smoke detector," I said. Calm, clinical. Thaddeus installed it on August 14th after our digital security audit flagged the first deepfake audio file in your iCloud backup. You'd gotten careless with your encryption protocol, Sabine. Sloppy for someone with your pedigree. Lennox opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again like a fish drowning in air. I didn't come home early tonight because of a flight or a whim, I continued. I came home because my security chief confirmed tonight was the night you intended to cross the point of no return. The financial coercion script was scheduled to begin. Week 3 of your timeline, the asset transfer authorization phase. Sabine's hands tightened on the arms of her chair. For the first time since I'd met her 4 years ago at a charity gala, where she'd charmed me with her knowledge of real estate law, I saw something crack in her perfect composure. Fear, not fear of what I'd shown her on that screen, fear of what else I knew. She looked at Thaddeus standing in the corner like a silent executioner. Then back at me. Her brilliant legal mind was doing the calculation. If I had 94 days of surveillance, what other infrastructure had I built? What other evidence had I compiled? How many other people in her operation had I already identified? Dad? Lennox finally managed. His voice cracked like he was 15 again. We can explain. No, I said. You really can't. I closed the laptop and leaned back in my father's chair. But you're going to try anyway, and I'm going to let you. Because I want to hear in your own words what possible justification exists for torturing your own mother. Sabine looked at Thaddeus standing behind them, then back at me. Her carefully constructed mask cracked for the first time, not because of what I'd shown her on that screen, but because she realized something far more terrifying. She didn't know what else I knew, and in the darkness of that study, I watched the brilliant architect of this conspiracy understand that she'd been walking through a trap for 3 months. What she didn't know yet was that the hidden camera was just the beginning of what I'd discovered. An hour after watching my son's world collapse, I sat in the warm yellow light of my kitchen and watched a 67-year-old housekeeper's hands shake so violently she could barely pour tea. Joyce Delaney, Jamaican immigrant, 19 spotless years of service, a woman who'd witnessed evil 3 weeks prior, but remained silent because her H-4 visa stood between her and exile from her daughter at Queen's College, brewed Colombian dark roast with the precision of someone trying to anchor herself to routine. The television mounted above the breakfast bar replayed footage from the Plaza Hotel Gala. There I was, on screen accepting my award, smiling at 400 people who had no idea what was happening 15 blocks away. She poured Earl Grey into a porcelain cup. Her hands trembled so badly the tea spilled across the marble counter. You know something more, don't you? I asked. She set the teapot down and stared at the steam rising from the spilled liquid. 40 seconds of suffocating silence. Thaddeus stood in the doorway. He'd escorted Lennox and Sabine from the building 20 minutes ago with instructions never to return without legal counsel. Now he stepped into the kitchen and placed one steadying hand on Joyce's shoulder. He needs the truth now, he said quietly. Joyce looked at me. Her eyes were wet. 3 weeks ago, she whispered. I was cleaning the living room windows, late afternoon. Miss Sabine, she didn't know I was there. I'd come in through the service entrance, quiet like always. She pulled a Samsung Galaxy A54 from her apron pocket with trembling fingers. She had this black device. Looked like some kind of medical diagnostic equipment, but with a microphone. She was reading from a script your words, Mr. Reed. My love, they are holding me hostage. Over and over, adjusting the pitch, the speed. Making the machine learn your voice. Joyce's voice cracked. I recorded 12 seconds from the hallway shadow. Then I went back to the kitchen and pretended I'd never been there. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. She looked down at her hands. Because the next morning, Miss Sabine came to me while I was preparing breakfast. She said she knew I'd been watching. Said if I told you anything, she'd report me to ICE for H4. Visa violation. Said I was working unauthorized hours, that she had documentation. My visa expires March 2024. My daughter Keisha, she's at Queen's College sophomore year. If they deport me, she couldn't finish the sentence. I reached across the counter and took the phone from her shaking hands. She handed me her phone. On the screen, my exact voice, was being calibrated like a theater script. The black device cycled through variations. Pitch up, pitch down, cadence faster, slower, each iteration sounding more like me than the last. And I realized this wasn't a sudden crime. It was a cold, engineered execution. Joyce, I said, You're not going anywhere. Your visa will be renewed. Your daughter will finish college. And Sabine will never threaten you again. She broke down weeping. Thaddeus guided her to a chair and handed her a cloth napkin. I forwarded the 12-second video to my encrypted server and deleted it from her phone. No evidence trail that could be traced back to her if this went to court. Get some rest, I told her. Tomorrow everything changes. She nodded and left through the staff hallway, still clutching the napkin. Thaddeus and I stood in the empty kitchen. The television still played gala footage. Senator Saxon shaking my hand, Judge Upshaw raising his glass, Jarrett Townsend laughing at something I'd said. Joyce's recording confirms the deepfake infrastructure, Thaddeus said. Combined with the bedroom surveillance, we have documented conspiracy. Good, I said. Start building the legal framework. I want every piece of evidence cataloged and ready for federal presentation. He nodded and left. I turned off the television and walked to my study. 11:30 p.m. The penthouse had gone completely silent. Edna was resting in the guest suite under medical supervision. Lennox and Sabine were somewhere in the city, probably in their Tribeca loft, trying to calculate how much I knew and what I'd do next. They had no idea. I sat in my father's chair and stared at the wall. A black and white photograph from 1962 hung in a simple frame Brooklyn docks. Cargo ships my father in his longshoreman's jacket before the heart attack took him when I was 9. Next to it, my first Forbes cover from 1994. 42 years between those two images. Orphaned at 9, washing dishes in Atlantic City at 17 for $4 an hour, signing my first casino deed at 31 with money I'd saved and borrowed and bled for. Every dollar of my empire was paid for in sweat and blood, but money is just numbers on screens. A man's name is the only thing he truly owns. And they'd stolen mine, not to rob me, though I knew that was coming. The offshore shell companies Thaddeus had tracked, the Phantom LLCs, the Miami cartel debt Lennox had accumulated trying to fund expansion projects I'd never approved. The financial architecture of their plan was visible now. Lennox owed someone $47 million. Probably more. That debt had teeth, the kind that don't wait for quarterly earnings reports. I could write a draft for that amount tonight. One signature, a wire clearance, and his debt vanishes. But that wouldn't save Edna. It wouldn't save Joyce. It wouldn't stop him from selling the next soul to buy himself another year. Money can be lost and rebuilt, but when they turn Edna's devotion into a cage to break her spirit, when they weaponize 44 years of marriage into psychological torture, that is where my mercy ends. I unlocked the lowest drawer of my desk with a key I'd kept on my person for 3 months. Inside lay an unactivated prepaid mobile device and a single sheet of paper with 7 names written in my own hand. Names of people who owed me debts, held power, or remembered favors from decades past. I had compiled this list in September, the moment I first suspected my son was planning something that would cross a line I couldn't ignore. By midnight, I would activate that phone and begin making calls that would set 11 days of strategic war into motion. At 12:15 in the morning, I stood on my terrace in -5-degree wind with a prepaid phone in my hand and began dismantling my son's life, one phone call at a time. Manhattan spread below me like a grid of light. 47 floors straight down to streets where yellow cabs still move through Friday night traffic. The wind cut through my tuxedo jacket with surgical precision. I'd forgotten to change after the gala. Didn't matter. The cold kept me sharp. I pulled the 7-name list from my pocket and activated the prepaid device. Burner phone, untraceable routing, the kind of infrastructure you build when you need to move without leaving digital fingerprints. Call 1. Thaddeus answered on the first ring. Activate all protocols, I said. Our window is exactly 11 days. Confirmed, he replied. Legal team assembles at 0600. Forensic audit begins Monday. I ended the call and moved to the second name. Call 2 went to a private investigator in Boston who'd once helped me track down a business partner who'd embezzled $3 million in 1998. He owed me a favor that had been aging for 25 years. I need full background on someone, I said. Everything. Financial records, travel history, known associates. I'm sending encrypted specifications in 30 seconds. He didn't ask questions. That's why he'd survived 3 decades in a profession where curiosity gets you killed. Call 3 was to an IT security specialist in San Francisco, a woman who designed the encryption protocols for 2 Fortune 500 companies and happened to owe me because I'd funded her startup when no venture capitalist would touch a black woman from Oakland with a computer science degree and no connections. I need a digital forensic teardown, I told her. Voice synthesis, software metadata, extraction, cloud storage, archaeology. Can you be in New York by Sunday? I can be there by tomorrow afternoon, she said. You need to understand something about debts in Manhattan. Real debts aren't written in contracts. They're carved into memory and paid back when the person holding them decides the time has come. I'd spent 42 years building a network of people who remembered what I'd done for them when nobody else would. Now I was collecting. Call 4 was to Senator Opal Saxon. Her personal cell phone, the one she kept for emergencies and favors that couldn't be documented. She answered on the third ring. Background noise suggested she was still at some late-night political function. Opal, I said. Remember 1995? It's time to settle. Silence. Then her voice dropped to a whisper. What do you need? Federal jurisdiction, I said. Elder abuse. Interstate fraud. I'm sending you a preliminary brief tomorrow. I need doors opened. Another pause. This is about your family. This is about justice, I corrected. Your committee has oversight. I need you ready to move when the evidence goes public. She exhaled slowly. Send me everything, she said. I'll make the calls. Call 5 went to Judge Lowell Upshaw's home number. He picked up on the second ring despite the late-hour retired judge's sleep light. It's happening, I said. The case you suspected in 2019. I have the proof. I heard him set down what sounded like a glass of whiskey. When, he asked. 2 weeks, I said. Maybe less. I need you ready to provide testimony about the pattern you identified 4 years ago. I've been ready since the day that case was withdrawn, he said. Call 6 was shorter. A forensic accountant in Chicago. A woman who'd once unraveled a Ponzi scheme so complex it had taken federal prosecutors 3 years to understand what she'd explained in a 90-page report. Follow the money, I told her. I'm sending transaction logs from 17 offshore entities. I need a map by Wednesday. Considered it done, she said. Call 7 was to an unlisted international number. It rang 4 times before connecting. No greeting, just silence waiting for recognition. I spoke 3 words, trigger plan B. The line went dead. 23 minutes, 7 calls. 7 people who would now begin moving pieces across a board my son didn't even know existed. I stood on that terrace for another 10 minutes, letting the wind freeze the sweat on my skin. Manhattan glittered below, oblivious, beautiful, merciless. Somewhere in that grid of light, Lennox and Sabine were sleeping or planning or drinking expensive wine while trying to calculate their next move. They had no idea the trap had already closed. I went inside and walked through the silent penthouse, past the living room where Joyce had witnessed Sabine rehearsing my voice, past the kitchen where I'd promised her safety, past my study where the surveillance footage sat, encrypted and waiting. The master bedroom door was open. Pale blue nightlight cast soft shadows across the walls. Edna lay with her head propped on pillows, eyes still covered with surgical dressing from the medical team's examination. But she was awake. I could tell from her breathing. I sat in the chair beside the bed and took her hand. When did you find out? She asked quietly. Her voice was steady, stronger than I'd expected. September, I said. Long silence filled the room, the kind of silence that holds entire conversations without words. Then she whispered something that stopped my heart. I knew too from the very first week. I froze. She knew. From the very first week she knew. The deepfake had a flaw, she continued. Soft, measured, like she'd been rehearsing this confession for months. After 44 years of marriage, I know how you speak. Your syntax, your rhythm, the way you pause before saying my name. Her hand tightened in mine. The voice on those recordings called me darling, with a cadence you've never used in your life. You always say it slower, softer, like you're tasting the word before you give it to me. Tears soaked through the surgical dressing. But I obeyed anyway, she whispered, because what if I was wrong? What if my ears were failing me along with my eyes? What if you really were in danger and my hesitation cost your life? So I crawled. I degraded myself. I broke my own dignity because I loved you more than I loved myself. I held her hand in the darkness of that bedroom at 2 in the morning and realized something that would haunt me through every move I made in the 11 days ahead. I wasn't the bravest person in this war. My wife, who'd spent 44 years learning the microscopic details of how I spoke, how I breathed, how I loved, had detected the deepfake immediately but chose to crawl across freezing marble anyway because she valued my life more than her own dignity. In this war between family and justice, she'd already paid the highest price. But morning was coming, and with it, the hardest investigation of my life. 5 hours after watching my wife break my heart with her courage, I sat at my kitchen table and learned exactly how my personal attorney of 22 years had engineered her torture. Gray morning light filtered through Manhattan fog. Joyce brewed Colombian dark roast with hands that had stopped trembling. Sleep and safety do remarkable things for the human nervous system. The television above the breakfast bar played a rerun of last night's gala. There I was, frozen in time, accepting an award while my world collapsed 15 blocks away. Thaddeus set a tablet on the table in front of me. Overnight brief, he said. Lennox and Sabine returned to their Tribeca loft at 11:47 p.m. No indication they're planning to flee. No unusual activity at any of their known accounts. He swiped to the next screen, but Jarrett Townsend received 3 encrypted calls from Sabine between midnight and 1 a.m. Each call lasted less than 90 seconds. Pattern suggests panic communication status updates, not strategic planning. I studied the call logs. They're trying to figure out what I know, I said. Exactly. Thaddeus pulled up another file. Technical documentation. Screenshots of software interfaces I didn't recognize. The deepfake voice synthesis, he explained. Our digital forensics team identified the platform 11 Labs Pro, enterprise-grade AI voice cloning. But here's what matters to achieve the level of accuracy we heard in that bedroom. The software requires a minimum of 4 hours of clean source audio, uninterrupted speech, no background noise, no crosstalk. He looked at me. Who has 4 hours of your uninterrupted voice? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Your personal lawyer, Thaddeus said quietly. Jarrett Townsend possesses every digital recording of your executive sessions for the past 22 years. Board meetings, strategy sessions, private consultations, all archived for legal compliance. 22 years. He drafted my father's final wishes. He stood beside me when Edna went into labor. I closed my eyes and tried to find the moment. I should have seen it coming. The truth is, I saw it. I just chose to look away. You don't build an empire by assuming everyone around you is corrupt, but you don't survive one by assuming they're all ain'ts either. Somewhere in the middle, I'd made a choice about Jarrett. I decided to trust him because the alternative was exhausting. Now my wife had paid the price for that exhaustion. Where is he now? I asked. Home. Upper West Side. We've been monitoring his movements since August. Good, let him sleep. I'll deal with him later. I stood and drained my coffee. Right now I need to talk to Soren. Sterling Tower. IT infrastructure room occupied the 12th floor. A windowless space filled with humming monitors, cold server racks, and the industrial smell of air conditioning running at maximum capacity. The heart of my digital empire. Firewalls, encryption, data routing protocols that moved billions of dollars across continents in microseconds. Soren Callahan stood in the center of it all, trembling. 29 years old, MIT computing prodigy, the sharpest technical mind I'd ever recruited. He'd built security systems that made federal agencies jealous. And right now, he looked like a kid who'd been called to the principal's office. I placed his personal flash drive on the desk between us. I know what you found, I said. I'm not here to take your livelihood. I'm here to listen. He stared at the drive. 90 seconds of suffocating silence. Thaddeus stepped forward and placed one steadying hand on Soren's shoulder. He needs the truth now, Thaddeus said quietly. Soren's hands shook as he reached for the drive. 6 weeks ago, he'd whispered, I was running routine network diagnostics, flagged an unauthorized VPN tunnel routing corporate files to an external node. Protocol violation. Should have been impossible. Our firewalls are supposed to catch that kind of breach. He pulled up logs on the nearest monitor. I traced the recipient address. Took me 4 days to break through the proxy layers. When I finally got to the source, his voice cracked. It was her, Sabine. 14 distinct data packets over 6 weeks. Personnel files, financial statements, security protocols. She was downloading our entire infrastructure piece by piece. Why didn't you report it? I asked. He looked at me with eyes that had clearly gone without sleep. Because when I tried to escalate to legal compliance, I was told the matter was being handled by Jarrett Townsend personally. He called me into his office, told me the data transfer was part of an authorized executive audit, said if I mentioned it to anyone including you, I'd be terminated for breach of confidentiality. Soren's hands balled into fists. I'm 29 years old, Mr. Reed. I have student loans. My mother has medical bills. Jarrett Townsend was the most powerful attorney in this building. I was terrified. How many other employees had seen pieces of this conspiracy and stayed silent because they couldn't afford to lose their jobs? I looked at this kid, the sharpest technical mind I'd ever recruited, now trembling in a server room because he'd been too afraid to speak truth to power for 6 weeks, and realized he wasn't malicious. He was just a regular man caught in an irregular vice. We have all been there. Soren, I said, you're not losing your job. You're getting a raise and a promotion. Director of Digital Security effective immediately. He blinked. What? You detected a breach that should have been impossible. You documented it. You preserved the evidence even when someone with institutional power tried to bury it. That's exactly the kind of integrity I need running my security infrastructure. I picked up the flash drive. But right now, I need you to do something for me. I need you to compile every data packet Sabine downloaded. Every file, every timestamp, every metadata tag. I want a complete forensic report by Monday morning. He nodded. Relief and purpose washed across his face. I can do that. Good. And Soren, from this moment forward, you report directly to me. Not legal, not compliance, me. If you see something wrong, I want to hear about it before anyone else. Yes, sir. I left him in that server room and walked to the elevator with Thaddeus. That was compassionate, Thaddeus observed. He deserved compassion, I said. He's a good kid who got caught in someone else's war. The elevator doors closed. But the next conversation I need to have won't be with a frightened employee. It will be with a man who spent 22 years earning my trust, just so he could sell it for the highest price. Thaddeus checked his phone. Jarrett just arrived at your office, he said, completely unaware that his own IT logs have already condemned him. The man who drafted my father's will stood beside me at my son's birth and drank 18-year-old scotch with me every Friday. For 22 years, walked into my office completely unaware that I was about to destroy his entire life. Jarrett Townsend looked exactly like he always did. Tailored charcoal suit, burgundy tie, leather briefcase. He smiled as he crossed to my desk. Emergency asset signature on a Saturday, he said. You know I bill weekend rates at time and a half, right? The joke fell flat. I gestured to the chair. He sat. Thaddeus stood by the door, silent, watching. I turned my laptop screen so Jarrett could see it. Before we discuss signatures, I said I need you to review something. The screen displayed a forensic data log. Timestamps, packet sizes, IP origins, destination tags. 14 distinct entries spread across 6 weeks, routing corporate files from Sterling Tower servers to an external node registered to a Cayman Islands proxy. The recipient, Sabine Reed. Jarrett's smile disappeared. I scrolled down. 14 data packets, I said. Personnel files, financial statements, security protocols. All through an unauthorized VPN tunnel that bypassed our firewalls. I looked at him. But what's really fascinating is this second log. I opened another file. 22 years of archive transfers, voice recordings from executive sessions, board meetings, strategy consultations. Every conversation I'd ever had in this office systematically transferred to external servers over 18 months. 473 hours of my voice, my speech patterns, my syntax, my pauses and inflections. Everything they needed to build a perfect clone. Jarrett's face drained of color. The metadata is unalterable, I said, verified by 3 independent auditors. IP addresses traced to source authentication requiring your biometric clearance, your fingerprint, your retinal scan, your personal encryption key. I leaned back. 22 years, Jarrett. I paid your firm $47 million in retainers, and you sold my life for an 8% stake in a ghost company. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. What is the price of 22 years of friendship? $47 million in legal fees, apparently. 8% of a ghost company. And one man's soul. How did he started. I held up one hand. Don't insult me with explanations. I have the financial records. The offshore shells. The Delaware LLC under your wife's maiden name. The wire transfers you thought were buried deep enough. I pulled up bank statements. Transaction logs. A paper trail federal prosecutors could build into an airtight case in 6 minutes. You provided the voice recordings, I said. You gave them my security protocols. You introduced my son to the accountant who helped hide his cartel debt. And when my IT director flagged the breach 6 weeks ago, you buried it. Jarrett's hands trembled. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. I cut him off. My son owed 47 million to people who don't accept payment plans. He needed my assets. Sabine needed my infrastructure. And you needed 8% of whatever they carved from my corpse. Silence filled the office. Thaddeus moved from the door and locked it from inside. The audible click echoed like a gunshot. The sound of that lock clicking shut was the sound of a life ending. Jarrett looked at the locked door, then at me, then at Thaddeus blocking the only exit. "What are you going to do?" he whispered. I stood and walked to the window. Manhattan spread below 47 floors of steel and glass. "You have two avenues," I said. "Total compliance with federal prosecutors by noon today. Every email, every document, every communication with Lennox Sabine or anyone else involved. You testify under oath. You forfeit your law license voluntarily and agree to a consent decree barring you from ever practicing again." I turned to face him. "Or I let you explain it to them without warning. Let you build a defense while federal agents execute search warrants on your home, your office, and every bank account you've touched in 5 years. If I cooperate, you'll still go to prison," I said flatly. "But 5 years instead of 20. Your wife keeps the house. Your daughters can visit without metal detectors and armed guards." I sat back down. "Noon, Jarrett. 90 minutes. Thaddeus will escort you to a conference room with a federal attorney waiting downstairs. You can start talking, or you can start running. But know this, I've already frozen every account you have access to. The passport you're thinking about flagged in every international database as of 6 a.m. this morning." He looked at me like I was a stranger. Maybe I was. Maybe the man who'd shared scotch with him every Friday night, who'd laughed at his law school stories and asked about his daughters. Maybe that man had died the moment I watched my wife crawl across freezing marble while his voice clone commanded her degradation. Jarrett buried his face in his hands, and then he wept, not quietly, not with dignity. He wept like a child, caught stealing like a man who just realized the full weight of what he'd done and what it would cost. I sat there behind my desk and watched him break, searched inside my chest for some flicker of the friendship we'd once had, some ember of 2 decades spent building my empire together, drinking expensive scotch, celebrating victories and mourning losses. But there was nothing. The man who'd drafted my father's final wishes, who'd stood beside me when Edna went into labor 38 years ago, who'd shared 18-year-old scotch with me every Friday night. That man buried his face in his hands and wept like a child caught stealing. And inside my chest, I felt absolutely nothing. 22 years of trust, and when he sold it for 8%, he'd taken my capacity to feel mercy along with everything else. But Jarrett's betrayal was just the surface. The data logs he'd agreed to provide would reveal who'd been pulling his strings all along. 2 hours after watching my personal lawyer weep, I sat in my study reading 4 months of emails that proved my son wasn't the monster I'd thought he was just the puppet. Thaddeus had secured the complete email archive through Jarrett's compliance agreement. 147 messages exchanged between my attorney and my daughter-in-law between August and December. Everyone encrypted. Everyone meticulously documenting a conspiracy so precise it could have been a doctoral thesis. I opened the first message, August 14th. Subject line initial framework. Sabine had written 17 pages, outlining New York State guardianship laws, psychological manipulation tactics, asset exposure timelines, and jurisdictional vulnerabilities. She'd mapped every detail which judges were sympathetic to elder abuse cases, which prosecutors had conviction rates above 90%, which forensic accountants could be trusted to miss specific red flags. She'd built a blueprint for destroying my life with the precision of an architect designing a cathedral. I scrolled through September, October, November, every stage planned, every contingency anticipated, every role allocated with surgical precision. Jarrett would provide voice recordings and legal cover. The IT security would be compromised through targeted recruitment. Financial records would be sanitized through shell companies Jarrett had established 3 years earlier, long before this conspiracy began. And Lennox. I found his operational assignment in an email dated September 23rd. Lennox's role is simple, Sabine had written. Just stand there and look emotionally devastated for the cameras. His genuine distress will authenticate the narrative when we go public. I kept reading. November 12th. The email that changed everything. Jarrett critical update. Lennox is becoming anxious about the timeline. He's questioning whether we should proceed. This is exactly what we need. His genuine panic makes the narrative flawless. We need him to believe this was his own concept. Let him think he's protecting the family assets from his father's cognitive decline. His authenticity is our greatest asset. I read that paragraph 3 times. My son isn't a criminal mastermind. He's a drowning man whose own wife is holding his head beneath the surface. She'd manipulated him so completely that he believed the torture was his idea, believed he was saving the family, believed his panic and moral anguish were signs of his own weakness, rather than evidence he was being psychologically destroyed by the woman who slept beside him every night. I looked up at Thaddeus. She's the architect, I said. He nodded. Every detail, every stage. She mapped the entire operation and positioned your son as the visible face while she remained in the shadows. Classic psychological warfare: make the target complicit in his own destruction. I closed the laptop. She understood my asset configuration better than my own flesh and blood, I said. And worse, she discovered exactly where my sentimentality lay. She knew I'd protect Edna above everything else. She knew I'd sacrifice the Empire to save her. But she miscalculated, Thaddeus said quietly. She assumed you'd negotiate, pay the ransom, transfer the assets to stop the torture. Instead, I'm going to dismantle her piece by piece, I said. I stood and looked at the clock. 2 p.m. Call Victoria Prescott, I told Thaddeus. Tell her I need an emergency estate restructure. Complete irrevocable transfer. I want it executed by dinner. The Midtown Manhattan Secure Conference Chamber occupied the 32nd floor of a building that specialized in discretion. Floor-to-ceiling glass overlooked frozen Central Park. The room was designed for exactly this kind of transaction, the kind where billionaires moved assets while their families plotted to steal them. Victoria Prescott sat across from me, reviewing documents with the clinical precision of someone who'd built legal fortresses for Manhattan's wealthiest families. 53 years old, 30 years specializing in asset protection and elder law. Judge Upshaw had recommended her personally, a woman who understood that sometimes the best defense against family was a wall they couldn't see until it was too late. Thaddeus and Judge Upshaw sat on either side as witnesses. Victoria slid the first document across the table. Irrevocable transfer of all liquid assets and real estate holdings to the newly formed Edna Reed Foundation, she said. Effective immediately upon execution. No reversals, no amendments, no dissolution clauses. I signed. She slid the second document. Revocation of every operational proxy power of attorney and advisory position ever granted to Lennox Reed. Retroactive to today's date. He loses all access to corporate infrastructure, financial systems, and strategic decision-making authority. I signed. She slid the third document. This one was thicker. The poison pill, she said. This is the critical protection mechanism. If any family member, blood relative, spouse, or descendant attempts to contest the foundation structure through legal challenge, arbitration, or public pressure, the entire estate automatically transfers to permanent federal trust administration. Irrevocable, irreversible. The beneficiaries become strangers selected by federal algorithm. She looked at me. Even if you die before this goes to trial, they can't touch it. Even if they claim undue influence or coercion, the challenge itself triggers the poison pill. Your assets become untouchable. I was building a fortress not with stone and mortar, but with legal language so dense that even death couldn't breach its walls. Even if my heart stops before dinner, I said they will never touch a single dollar. Victoria nodded. This structure is legally impenetrable. The moment any family member files a contest, the entire estate automatically transfers to federal administration. Your daughter-in-law spent months mapping your assets. This document makes that entire map worthless. I picked up the pen. Judge Upshaw placed his hand over the signature line. Once you sign this, he said quietly, there's no going back. Your son loses his inheritance. Your grandchildren, if there ever are any, lose their legacy. Everything you built goes to strangers. I looked at him. My son chose to torture his own mother for money he thought would be his, I said. Let him explain to his future children why their grandfather gave away a fortune rather than let it fall into the hands of people who valued it more than human dignity. I signed the final deed at precisely 5:47 p.m. on December 6, 2023. Watched the notary stamp seal into the paper. From that exact second, $2 billion ceased to belong to me. It belonged to the woman I'd loved for 44 years, and to strangers who hadn't even been born yet. The brilliant architect who'd spent months mapping every detail of my estate had just discovered her masterpiece was built on sand. Even if my heart stopped before dinner, she would never see a single dollar. But protecting the money was just the first wall I still needed to understand exactly how deep this conspiracy went. The legal fortress was built, the money was protected, but I still needed to understand exactly how many people had watched my wife suffer and chosen their own comfort over her dignity. At 7 p.m., I found Joyce in the kitchen preparing dinner. She moved through her routine with the mechanical precision of someone trying to anchor herself to normalcy, chopping vegetables, checking temperatures, setting the table for one. I sat at the counter and watched her work. "Joyce," I said, "why did you wait 3 weeks to come forward?" Her hands stopped mid-motion. The knife hovered above a half-chopped carrot. After you recorded Sabine rehearsing my voice," I continued, "you kept that video hidden for 21 days. I need to understand why." She set the knife down carefully, turned to face me. "Because 2 weeks after I recorded it," she said quietly, "Miss Sabine cornered me in the laundry room." Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled. She didn't yell, didn't threaten directly. She just laid a folder on the table with my H-4 visa documentation, all my papers. Everything showing my status expires March 2024. Joyce looked down at her hands. Then she asked me a question, very calm, very polite. "Do you know what ICE does to overstays?" "From Kingston, Jamaica is a very long way away, Joyce." She looked up at me. "My daughter Keisha is a sophomore at Queen's College. She's on a student visa tied to my status. If I get deported, she gets deported. 2 years of college gone, her entire future gone. So I stayed silent for 21 days because I was terrified of being separated from my child. 67 years old, 19 years of spotless loyalty, and they found her weakest point within 2 weeks." I looked at Joyce. This woman who'd cleaned my home, cooked my meals, witnessed my family's ugliest moments without judgment, and realized these monsters didn't just target the rich. They systematically broke the weakest person they could find to ensure their silence. "Your visa will be renewed," I said. "Keisha will finish college, and Sabine will never threaten you again. I promise you that." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I left her in the kitchen and went to my study. 2 hours later, I picked up my secure phone and dialed a number I'd committed to memory years ago. Dr. Tanya Finch answered on the third ring. "Mr. Reed," she said, professional, measured. "I wasn't expecting to hear from you this evening. Is Edna experiencing any complications from the procedure?" I cut through the pleasantries. "Who approached you from my family regarding the extension of my wife's blindfold timeline?" Silence. 12 seconds of it. I counted. Dr. Finch was 54 years old. NYU Langone's premier retinal specialist. She'd performed Edna's surgery, with hands so steady they could operate on vessels thinner than human hair. She made $300,000 a year. She had a reputation that commanded respect across 3 hospital systems. And right now, those 12 seconds of silence told me everything I needed to know. "I don't understand the question," she finally said. Her voice had changed. The professional confidence was gone. "Yes, you do," I said. "Someone from my family contacted you about extending the medical occlusion period beyond the standard 9-day recovery window. I need to know who it was and what they offered you." Another pause, shorter this time. "Mr. Reed, what?" "Dr. Finch," I interrupted. "I have recordings. I have emails. I have financial transaction logs that cover every person who came within 10 feet of this conspiracy. Right now, you have one chance to tell me the truth before I turn everything I have over to the New York State Board of Medical Licensure." I heard her breathing change. "She offered me $500,000, Dr. Finch whispered, cash, under the table, to write a medical directive extending the occlusion window from 9 days to 14 days. She said it was for Edna's long-term protection, that the extra healing time would improve outcomes." How many phone calls does it take to save a life? "One. Just one call to me, to the hospital board, to anyone with power to intervene." "And you accepted?" I asked. "No," she said quickly. "No, I refused the money. I told her the 9-day window was medically optimal, and I wouldn't alter it for any reason." "But you didn't report it," I said. Silence again. "You didn't report it," I repeated. "Someone offered you $500,000 in cash to extend my wife's blindness, and you didn't tell anyone. Not the hospital board, not medical ethics, not me." "I was afraid," she said, her voice cracked. "Your daughter-in-law is married into one of the most powerful families in Manhattan. If I reported it, and it became public, if there was an investigation, my reputation would be destroyed. Even if I was cleared, The association alone would what I cut her off. Cost you referrals, damage your standing at cocktail parties, make other wealthy families uncomfortable hiring you. I leaned back in my chair. You declined the money that keeps you out of a cell, I said. But my wife was on her knees last night because you chose your comfort over a phone call to me. She began to sob over the line, not the quiet, dignified tears of remorse, the desperate weeping of someone who just realized the true cost of their comfort. I sat there in my study at 9 o'clock on a Saturday night, listening to a doctor who made $300,000 a year cry because she'd chosen her reputation over a phone call that would have ended my wife's torture. And I did not offer comfort. Sometimes truth needs to remain sharp enough to cut through the rot. Dr. Finch, I said, you will provide a complete written statement documenting every interaction you had with Sabine Reed. You will submit it to federal prosecutors by Monday morning. You will testify under oath if required, and you will cooperate fully with any investigation into medical ethics violations. Her sobbing continued. If you do this, I continued, I will recommend leniency. Your license stays intact. Your career survives. But if you hesitate, if you try to protect yourself one more time, I will make sure every hospital board in America knows exactly what you chose when a patient needed you to be brave. I ended the call, sat in the darkness of my study. Joyce had been threatened with deportation. Dr. Finch had been offered $500,000. Soren had been intimidated by institutional power. Jarrett had been bought for 8%. Sabine hadn't just built a conspiracy, she'd built a systematic machine that identified every person's weakness and leveraged it with surgical precision. But the deepest rot was still hidden, and it came with a $31 million price tag and a deadline 9 days away. 2 hours after refusing comfort to a doctor who'd chosen silence, I learned my son wasn't just a thief. He was a dead man running from a cartel with a 9-day deadline. 11 p.m. Saturday night. Thaddeus placed an unredacted ledger packet on my desk. The analysis of Jarrett's encrypted files had revealed the true catalyst, the desperation that had driven my son to torture his own mother. I opened the first page. Lennox Reed, 16 million in unsecured credit lines across 7 institutions. 31 million owed to Miami's RIA syndicate, 4 months overdue. I kept reading. The debt wasn't some abstract business liability. 3 weeks ago, one of Lennox's close associates had died in a Brickell Avenue hit-and-run. The police report called it an accident. The forensic analysis Thaddeus had commissioned called it a message. I looked at the final page, the deadline. December 15th, 2023. 9 days away. My son isn't acting out of simple greed, I said quietly. He is running for his life. Thaddeus nodded. And men do the worst things imaginable when they think their time is up. I closed the ledger and stared at my desk. I could write a draft for $31 million tonight. One signature, a wire clearance, and his debt vanishes. But that wouldn't save Edna. It wouldn't save Joyce. It wouldn't stop him from selling the next soul to buy himself another year. What is desperation worth? $31 million, 9 days, and a willingness to torture the woman who gave you life. Keep monitoring the cartel communications, I told Thaddeus. I need to know if they're escalating before the 15th. He left. I sat alone in my study until dawn. Sunday morning, 9 a.m. Blue Bottle coffee in the Flatiron District. Corner booth away from the windows. 2 cortados sat untouched on the table. Queenie Poole arrived exactly on time. Same woman who'd asked the calculated transparency question at my gala. 41 years old. New York Times investigative reporter, sharp eyes that missed nothing. She sat across from me and didn't touch her coffee. Thank you for meeting, she said. You've been tracking Jarrett Townsend, I said, not a question. She nodded. 4 months. Offshore estate account manipulation, elder exploitation patterns across multiple wealthy families. The expose is fully formatted and legally vetted. I just need one thing, an internal verification source. Someone with direct knowledge who's willing to go on record. She looked at me. I think you're that source. I picked up my espresso, still hot. I will be your exclusive on-record source, I said. Full cooperation, complete documentation, access to evidence that will make your editors very happy. Her eyes lit up. But, I continued, the article remains under absolute embargo until exactly 5 p.m. on December 16th. Not 1 minute earlier, not 1 minute later. If you publish before that deadline, our agreement ends and I retract everything. She studied me for a long moment. Why December 16th? Because that's when all the other pieces fall into place, I said. Federal prosecutors, financial audits, coordinated exposure across multiple jurisdictions. Your article will be the capstone, the public revelation that contextualizes everything that happens that day. But if you break early, you give them time to run. She pulled out a notebook. I can work with that timeline, she said, but I need to understand you've been planning this coordination for how long? I finished my espresso in a single swallow. I've been mapping this since September. We shook hands across the table. She stared at me with something like awe. You've been 3 months ahead of them this entire time. 4, I corrected, and they still don't know. I left her in that coffee shop and went home to set the final trap. 3 p.m. Sunday afternoon, penthouse study. Thaddeus and Soren worked at my desk while I stood by the window, watching Manhattan stretch below. You need to understand something about setting traps in Manhattan. The best ones don't require breaking the law. They simply require knowing exactly what your enemy wants most. Directory is constructed, Soren said, titled Sterling Undisclosed Assets, Q4 2023. Contains fabricated Nevada commercial development deeds valued at $340 million, plus liquid Cayman Islands account statement showing $120 million, $460 million in fake assets. Bait designed to look like the unmapped wealth Sabine had been searching for since August. Access parameters, I asked. Adjusted to allow Jarrett's account to discover it, Soren replied. He's still operational under our surveillance. The folder will appear in his directory tree like an accidental misconfiguration, something he wasn't supposed to see but can't unsee once he finds it. Thaddeus looked up from his tablet. He'll feed it to Sabine within hours, guaranteed. Good, I said. The moment she views an unmapped 460 million, she will accelerate her timeline. And when people rush, they leave prints. Digital fingerprints, communication errors, panic decisions that can be documented and prosecuted. I walked to the desk. Make it live. Soren's fingers moved across the keyboard. 3:47 p.m. The trap was set. We sat in silence watching the access logs scroll across the screen. Thaddeus had coffee delivered. The sun dropped toward the Hudson. 4:23 p.m. Soren's monitor flashed. Her remote credential just accessed the folder, he said. Timestamp 4:23 p.m. I looked at the clock. 36 minutes. She was hungrier than I estimated, I said. Thaddeus leaned back in his chair. You thought she'd wait until tomorrow. I thought she'd verify the intelligence first, I said. Cross-reference the Nevada deeds against public records. Check the Cayman account numbers against known sterling patterns. Basic due diligence would take at least 6 hours. I looked at the screen showing Sabine's access log, but she couldn't wait. She saw 460 million in unmapped assets, and she accessed it within 36 minutes. That kind of hunger creates mistakes. Soren pulled up her access pattern. She downloaded 3 files, didn't just view them, downloaded them to her personal device. That's direct evidence of corporate espionage with prosecutable metadata. Perfect, I said. The access log showed her credential had touched that fraudulent folder at exactly 4:23 p.m. 36 minutes, after we'd made it visible to Jarrett's compromised account. I'd estimated she'd wait at least 6 hours, maybe overnight, before acting on intelligence that appeared too good to verify. But she'd been so hungry for that unmapped 460 million that she'd accessed it faster than I'd thought possible. And in her hunger, she'd just confirmed everything I needed to know. She was accelerating. She was desperate. And when December 16th arrived, she would walk straight into a trap she'd never see coming. But first, I needed to understand exactly what I was about to do to my own son. I invited my son to breakfast 3 days after watching him conspire to destroy me. And when he asked why Sabine wasn't invited, I smiled and told him this was about legacy. Monday morning, Daniel Restaurant on East 65th Street. I'd reserved the private dining room floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking the quiet side of the Upper East Side, away from the noise and the eyes. Lennox arrived at 10 a.m. exactly. Navy suit, Brioni, the tie I'd bought him for his birthday last year. He looked terrible, 8 pounds lighter than he'd been 11 days ago. The weight had come off his face first. Cheekbones, sharp eyes sunken. His hands trembled slightly when he reached across the table to shake mine. The same tremor my own father had during the 1987 Atlantic City bankruptcy. I'd been 29 years old watching him sign away everything he'd built, and his hands had shaken exactly like this. Genetic echo of desperation across 3 generations. Dad, Lennox said, good to see you. I gestured to the chair. Sit, I ordered your usual eggs Benedict black coffee. He sat, looked around the empty room. Where's Sabina? This is just us, I said. Father and son, we don't get enough of these moments. He relaxed slightly. Good, that's what I needed. I spent the next 2 hours talking about legacy. The Nevada casino expansion. I'd been planning 4 properties, $340 million in acquisition costs. How I wanted him leading the project, his vision, his execution. By next summer, he'd be running half the empire. Nevada's the crown jewel. Lennox, I said, I want you at the center of it. Q2 2024, you'll inherit leadership responsibilities I've been holding too tight for too long. His eyes lit up, desperation disguised as ambition. I won't let you down, he said. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. You already have made me proud, I lied. At 12:15 p.m., I asked the question I'd been building toward. Is there anything you need to tell me, son? Anything weighing on you? 4.2 seconds of silence. I counted. Just excited about Nevada, Dad, he said. Just want to make you proud. The lie hung in the air between us like smoke. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a small leather box. I want you to have this, I said. He opened it. The 1952 Patek Philippe watch. The one my father had worn until the day he died. The one I'd bought back at auction in 1989 for $62,000. Lennox stared at it. Dad, I can't. This was Grandpa's. And now it's yours, I said. Legacy isn't just about buildings and bank accounts. It's about the things we pass down that money can't buy. He put it on. His hands were still trembling. I watched my son fasten that watch around his wrist and felt something crack inside my chest. Not my resolve that was solid as Manhattan bedrock. What cracked was the last fragile hope that he might confess, that he might look at me across this table and tell me the truth. But he didn't. So I smiled, paid the check, and let him walk out of that restaurant wearing my father's watch. The same watch that would be on his wrist when federal agents put him in handcuffs in 8 days. 11 p.m., my study. Encrypted satellite phone. I dialed a number I'd committed to memory 28 years ago. Senator Opal Saxon answered on the second ring. Stanley, she said, cautious. It's late? December 1995, I said. $180,000 from a Macau casino owner. Illegal campaign donation that would have ended your first Senate run before it started. I made that disappear for you, Opal. You've had 28 years of Senate power because of me. Silence on the line. What do you want? She asked quietly. I need an expedited federal arrest warrant, I said, signed by the Attorney General. Executable before 6 a.m. on December 16th. Charges wire fraud, elder abuse conspiracy, RICO predicate acts. Stanley, I can't interfere with DOJ on a family matter. It's not a request. I cut her off. The target is my son. I have the evidence. I have the witnesses. I need the federal machinery to move faster than it normally does. 8 days. I can't. I still have the original 1995 evidence ledger, I said, in a safety deposit box in Brooklyn. Every transaction, every wire transfer, every conversation you thought was buried. I let that sink in, and I have 2023 documentation of your current chief of staff's offshore accounts. The ones he thinks are hidden behind Cayman proxies. 4 minutes of silence. I counted those too. I'll make the call tomorrow morning, she finally said. Her voice had changed. National Security Consultation Channel. The AG will sign, but after this, Stanley, we're even. We were always even, Opal, I said. I just needed you to remember. I ended the call at 11:19 p.m., sat in the dark study staring at a photograph on my desk. Lennox, at 8 years old. Gap-toothed smile. Holding a trophy from some Little League game I'd missed because of a business meeting in Atlantic City. In 1995, I saved Opal Saxon's career to build a network. In 2023, I'm cashing that network to destroy my son. Power is a ledger where every asset eventually becomes a weapon against yourself. 2 a.m., my phone vibrated. Encrypted message from Soren Callahan's forensic team. Subject line urgent. I opened it. Sabine attempted to access Edna's medical files at Mount Sinai tonight. ET Security flagged the breach attempt at 1:47 a.m. She used a compromised physician credential to query patient records. Search terms. Read Edna. Diagnosis codes. Glioblastoma stage 4, terminal prognosis. She's looking for the diagnosis you've hidden for 11 months. She knows about the brain tumor. I sat there in the darkness of my study holding a phone that had just told me my deepest secret was no longer secret. Edna's diagnosis. March 2023. Stage 4, glioblastoma. 4 to 6 months. I'd hidden it from everyone, from Lennox, from Sabine, from the world, because I knew the moment they found out, they'd use it as leverage. And now Sabine had found it anyway. She was accelerating on multiple fronts. The fake Nevada assets I'd planted, the medical files, the conspiracy timeline. December 16th suddenly felt very far away. My wife sat upright in the dark at 1 a.m. and spoke 6 words that broke 44 years. I knew it wasn't you, Stanley. I'd been watching her breathe from the leather chair beside her bed when she said it. The penthouse was silent, except for the air purifier's hum. The voice commanding me, she said quietly. I identified it as fraudulent the first time I heard it, September 7th. Whoever it was called me my darling before the request. You've never done that in 44 years, Stanley. You always say it after. Close the door, my darling, never before. You knew from the beginning, from the first word. The syntax was wrong. The pacing was wrong. On the third call, there was a digital artifact. A half-second delay before the word obey. I knew it was technology, not you. She turned her sightless eyes toward my voice. But what if my blindness made me wrong? What if you were truly captured and my refusal killed you? 44 years of devotion doesn't create clarity, Stanley. It creates impossible calculus. I chose degradation over the risk of your death. I sat on the edge of her bed and took her cold hand bones, too prominent beneath the skin. The glioblastoma diagnosis I'd hidden for 11 months felt like a stone in my chest. She had endured months of torture to protect me, while her own brain was killing her. I'm sorry, I said. Don't be. She squeezed my fingers weakly. I made my choice. Now make yours. At 10 a.m., I walked into the fourth-floor boardroom, where Soren Callahan had prepared what he called the full financial picture. Thaddeus Whitfield, my corporate counsel for 31 years, sat with his reading glasses perched on his nose and his jaw tight. The wall screen displayed a flowchart with Marsden Myers. At its center, my CFO for 20 months, Princeton graduate, impeccable Blackstone references. Red lines connected his name to dozens of transactions. Myers has been routing weekly liquidity reports to an encrypted address for 20 months, Soren said. Every Friday at 4 p.m. Cash reserves, credit lines, asset liquidity, everything needed to know exactly how vulnerable you are at any given moment. Sabine Reed receives them, I said. It wasn't a question. Soren clicked again. A Delaware shell corporation appeared. Meridian Advisory Solutions, LLC. Myers receives $2 million annually through this entity. Payments began 1 week after his hiring. He paused. There's more. 20 months ago, someone sent Lennox an unsolicited CFO recommendation, Myers by name, with his full resume. Lennox believed it was a headhunter he'd contacted. It wasn't. The email originated from a VPN routing back to Sabine. Thaddeus removed his glasses. Your son didn't hire Marsden Stanley. Sabine planted him, then made Lennox believe it was his own decision. How do you process the fact that every family dinner, every holiday toast, every polite conversation was theater while she buried knives in your infrastructure? I walked to the window overlooking Madison Avenue. December gray pressed against the glass. 4 stories below, people hurried through there Tuesday morning carrying coffee and briefcases, unaware that in this room we were dismantling a conspiracy 2 years in the making. Pull everything on Marsden, I said. Bank records, communications, travel history. Where is he now? 6th floor, Soren said. He doesn't know we're on to him. Thaddeus termination papers lawsuit. Breach of fiduciary duty, corporate espionage fraud. Personal liability for every dollar stolen and every dollar of damage caused. Already drafted. He slid a folder across the table. Soren's laptop chimed. He stared at the screen with an expression I couldn't read, then clicked a key. Grainy archival footage appeared on the wall, March 19th, 2021. A woman stood across from Sterling Tower photographing the building directory through the ground floor windows. Sunglasses, scarf, but the profile was unmistakable. That's Sabine, I said. 2 years before she met Lennox, Soren said quietly. 2 years before their accidental encounter at the Guggenheim that Lennox described as fate. He looked at me. Stanley, your son was never the target. He was the access point. When Dr. Finch's hands reached for my wife's eye dressing at 2 p.m. Tuesday, I realized I'd spent 11 months fighting for an empire when all I needed was 6 seconds of her looking at me again. The March 2021 footage of Sabine photographing Sterling Tower had kept me awake through Monday night, but Tuesday morning brought a different kind of reckoning. I'd summoned Dr. Tanya Finch to the penthouse under the leverage I'd established, not to threaten, but to restore what my son and his wife had stolen from Edna. Dr. Finch arrived at precisely 2 p.m., her medical bag in hand, her face carefully neutral. I led her to the master bedroom, where Edna sat upright, against white pillows, both eyes still bandaged. December light filtered through the 47th floor windows, softening the room's edges. "Mrs. Reed," Dr. Finch said quietly, sitting on the edge of the bed, "I'm going to remove the left dressing. The swelling has resolved faster than baseline metrics predicted. Recovery looks excellent." I stood near the window, hands in my pockets, watching Dr. Finch's fingers work with practiced precision. Gauze unwound slowly, layer after layer, until Edna's left eye emerged still slightly swollen, the lid heavy but unmistakably clear. "Open slowly," Dr. Finch instructed. "The light will feel sharp at first." Edna's left eyelid lifted. Her pupil contracted against the brightness, then adjusted. She blinked twice, her gaze unfocused, searching the room. Then her eye found mine. We looked at each other in complete silence. 6 seconds, maybe 7. Her iris was the same gray-blue I'd memorized 44 years ago, now framed by surgical bruising and age, but unmistakably hers. She smiled barely, just the corner of her mouth lifting, and I felt something in my chest crack open that no amount of wealth had ever touched. "Stanley," she whispered. I crossed the room and took her hand. Her fingers were cold, the bones too prominent under translucent skin, but her grip was steady. Dr. Finch stood gathering the soiled dressings into a medical waste bag. "I'll return Thursday to assess the right eye. The timeline remains cautious, but if recovery continues, at this rate, both eyes should be clear by December 15th. She moved toward the door, then paused with her hand on the frame. She turned back, her expression no longer neutral. "I logged the incident with Adult Protective Services this morning," she said quietly. "Should have done it 2 weeks ago. I'm sorry." The room went still. I stared at her, processing the words. She'd submitted to my leverage, examined Edna, removed the dressing, provided treatment, but she'd also chosen legal accountability independently. "Thank you," I said. Dr. Finch nodded once and left. I sat beside Edna on the bed, her one cleared eye still fixed on my face. That smile through the blurred vision was worth $2 billion. Everything else was just ledger noise. You can't purchase the geometry of someone's gaze finding yours after darkness. I'd built casinos across 3 states, negotiated with senators and syndicates, accumulated assets most men only dream of, but none of it had prepared me for the simple arithmetic of my wife's pupil adjusting to December light and recognizing me again. Before I tell you what Judge Upshaw revealed about the families Jarrett destroyed, are you still with me? Comment. A, if you think this fight is about justice, or B, if you think it's about revenge. Add one short reason so I can see how you're reading this. What comes next includes some fictionalized details, added for emotional impact, but the lesson behind it is what matters. Wednesday evening, I drove north to Winged Foot Golf Club in Mamaroneck. The library was empty except for Judge Lowell Upshaw, who stood near the fireplace pouring Macallan 25 into 2 crystal glasses. Judge Upshaw was 71, retired from the Southern District of New York federal bench. In 2022, after 19 years, a man whose rulings I'd watched shape corporate law for 2 decades. "Stanley," he handed me a glass. "You look tired." I admitted, sitting in a leather chair near the fire. He settled across from me, his expression grave. "Senator Saxon called, said you invoked a 28-year debt. She's pushing the AG for federal warrants executable before 6 a.m. December 16th. "That's correct." "Tell me why I should sign orders for this," he said quietly, "because I need to understand what I'm authorizing." I explained everything. The deepfake torture using my cloned voice, the 94 days of surveillance footage, Jarrett's 22 years of voice recordings sold for $47 million, Sabine's 2-year infiltration, the March 2021 footage showing premeditation before she'd even met Lennox. Judge Upshaw listened without interruption, his whiskey untouched. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment, firelight reflecting in his reading glasses. 2019, he said finally. Estate fraud case, 1.8 million. Jarrett Dane's signature appeared on probate revisions that transferred assets 3 days before the client's death. Case withdrawn, lack of clean evidence. I've tracked him ever since. I leaned forward. "You knew about Jarrett." "I've known he was dirty for 4 years, Stanley. But knowing and proving are different animals." He took a slow sip. There are at least two other families without your billions or network. They accepted the loss from humiliation. Their cases never made it to trial because they couldn't afford forensic accountants, couldn't survive the publicity, couldn't outlast Jarrett's legal delays. He set his glass down with deliberate care. I'm not helping you for friendship, he said. I'm not signing federal orders to protect your empire. I'm doing this for those two families who lack the resources to fight. This is their justice delayed, but finally actionable. The fire crackled. Outside, December dusk settled over the golf course. Sometimes the cleanest fuel is regret that's aged long enough to burn without smoke. Then let's make sure it counts, I said. We finished our whiskey in silence. Two old men recognizing that delayed justice is still justice, if the fire burns clean. At 6:45 p.m. I walked back to my car. The drive south on Hutchinson Parkway was quiet, Manhattan's skyline glowing in the distance. My phone buzzed at 7:03 p.m. Encrypted message from Soren Callahan. I pulled onto the shoulder and read it twice. Ran facial recognition on March 2021 footage. The woman photographing Sterling Tower isn't Sabine Reed. Bone structure, different cheekbones, orbital spacing, jaw angle. Either she had extensive reconstructive surgery between 2021 and meeting Lennox in 2023, or Sabine Reed isn't her real name. My hands trembled on the steering wheel. The parkway traffic blurred past headlights, streaking through December darkness. If Sabine wasn't Sabine, then everything I thought I understood about this conspiracy had just collapsed into something far worse. I gave the DEA coordinates to 17 Reyes Syndicate nodes in Miami on Wednesday night, and in exchange received the one thing my son's cartel debt could never buy: federal protection from retaliation when the arrests began. The facial recognition results had kept me awake Tuesday night, but by Wednesday morning, I'd made my decision. If Sabine had reconstructed her face and identity to hunt me, then I needed insurance beyond Manhattan courtrooms. Wednesday evening at 8 p.m., I sat in the back of my Mercedes Maybach on FDR Drive, watching Manhattan's skyline slide past through armored glass. Thaddeus Whitfield sat across from me, secured satellite phone between us on the leather seat. I dialed a number I hadn't used in 28 years. Ledger protocol, I said when the line connected. Silence. Then Reed. Didn't expect to hear from you again. The voice belonged to someone I'd worked with in the 90s when I consulted for the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. I'd helped them map transnational money flows, identify shell networks, decode offshore structures. In exchange, I'd built something they called the Ledger, a system of reciprocal favors, dormant for decades, activated only when the math became desperate. Transmitting coordinates of Reyes Syndicate asset nodes in Miami, I said. Wynwood Logistics Hub, Coral Gables Cash Depot, First National Clearing Accounts. I need absolute federal protection and synchronized timing. What's the timeline? December 16th, 6 a.m. Manhattan federal arrests happened simultaneously with Miami DEA raids. I need the cartel neutralized before they learn my son's name is on the warrant. Thaddeus typed rapidly, uploading encrypted files. 20 months of liquidity reports Sabine's routing patterns, Lennox's debt structure. The ledger still keeps flawless memory, Mr. Reed, the voice said. We've been waiting 30 years to collect on Miami. You'll have your protection. The line went dead. Thaddeus closed the laptop. You're fighting 3 wars at once, blood law and iron. Most men can't win one. Most men don't have 30 years of dormant insurance, I said quietly. The SUV turned onto Water Street. I'd spent 3 decades building networks, invisible to my own family, FBI contacts, federal judges, senators with debts. The ledger wasn't just favors. It was architecture designed to bear simultaneous weight across 3 jurisdictions. Sunday evening, December 14th, I found Edna in the master bedroom at 10 p.m., standing before the vanity mirror. Dr. Finch had removed the final dressings that afternoon. Both eyes were clear now, still bruised around the lids, but functional. She studied her reflections slowly, turning her face left and right, examining what 9 days had left behind. What happens tomorrow? She asked without turning. I stood in the doorway. Tomorrow I end this. Our son goes to federal penitentiary. Yes. She was silent, her eyes meeting mine in the mirror's reflection. Is there no other route? She whispered. If I step back, they'll find another family. That family won't have me. How many wives in history have given explicit permission for their husband to imprison their son? Edna turned from the mirror and crossed the room. She took my hands, her grip surprisingly strong. Then do it, she said. A single tear tracked down her left cheek. But look him in the eye once before the doors close. Let him know you loved him. I pulled her close, feeling her shoulders shake. Outside the windows, 8 million people lived ordinary Sunday nights, unaware that in 9 hours, federal machinery would dismantle the only family I had left. Monday morning, December 15th. I entered Lennox's Tribeca loft at 8 a.m. Sabine was away at a strategy meeting. Lennox sat on the industrial couch in wrinkled clothes, unwashed, staring at nothing. I sat across from him without invitation. I didn't come to talk about documents, I said, or evidence, or what happens tomorrow morning. He looked up slowly, his eyes red-rimmed. When you were 7 years old, I continued, you crashed your bicycle in Prospect Park. The front wheel caught a root. You went over the handlebars, tore your knee open on the pavement. Blood everywhere, but you didn't cry. Lennox stared at me. You just looked up at me and asked one question, are you proud of me, Dad? His jaw tightened. I didn't know how to answer then, I said quietly. Lennox's gaze dropped to the floorboards. You never told me you were. I know. The words felt like broken glass in my throat. That is my failure. The loft was silent except for traffic outside. December light filtered through the industrial windows, illuminating dust suspended in the air between us. But that failure, I said standing, cannot rewrite tomorrow morning. I walked toward the door. Every step felt like crossing a minefield. The gravitational pull to look back was almost unbearable. I knew a single backward glance might unravel the entire federal apparatus scheduled to execute in 22 hours. If my eyes drifted to that door, mercy might erase tomorrow. I reached the door at 8:47 a.m. and kept walking. I returned to the penthouse at 10 a.m. to find Soren waiting in the study, his laptop open on my desk. You need to see this, he said. The screen showed a German birth certificate dated May 1987. Name Clara Voss. Father Werner Voss. Below it, a corporate bankruptcy filing from October 2008. Atlantic City Casino. Collapsed $340 million in losses. I stared at the trustee name on the document. Stanley Reed. Werner Voss was a German industrialist, Soren said quietly. Lost everything in your Atlantic City bankruptcy. Committed suicide in 2009. His daughter Clara disappeared from public records in 2010. Reappeared in 2021 as Sabine Reed after extensive facial reconstruction. My hands went cold. She didn't target Lennox randomly, Soren continued. She's been hunting you for 15 years. Your son was never the objective. He was the access point to destroy the man who destroyed her father. I sat down slowly, the room tilting. Every piece suddenly made geometric sense. The 2-year surveillance, the deepfake torture using my voice, the infiltration Marsden Myers planted 20 months before the wedding. Sabine Reed didn't exist. Clara Voss had been hunting me since she was 22 years old. And tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. I was going to send her to federal prison alongside my son. I watched dawn break over the East River on December 16th. Knowing it was the last morning, I'd look at Manhattan and still have a son outside federal custody. The Clara Voss discovery had kept me awake through the night. I'd sat in the penthouse study reading Werner Voss's suicide note from 2009, retrieved from German public records, watching a father's despair bleed through 3 handwritten pages. His daughter had spent 15 years transforming that grief into surgical precision, reconstructing her face and identity to hunt the man who'd administered his bankruptcy. Now, at 6 a.m., that hunt was about to end. I stood at the window with my third espresso, watching December sunrise paint the skyline gold. Thaddeus and Soren sat at the operations desk behind me, laptops open, secure phones within reach. Final checklist, I said without turning. Thaddeus read from his screen. A PS federal welfare warrant signed by the Attorney General at 11:47 p.m. last night. Senator Saxon delivered as promised. The case is no longer local jurisdiction, it's federal enforcement now. I turned. Explain. Elder abuse across state lines, financial exploitation exceeding 5 million, conspiracy involving interstate commerce. Thaddeus removed his glasses. Saxon elevated it. The AG had no choice but to sign. Federal machinery overrides everything now. The entry twist settled into place. I'd transformed Edna's torture from a family tragedy into federal priority, activated dormant favors across 3 decades, and forced the Attorney General's hand through a senator who owed me 28 years. FBI, I asked. Arrest teams positioned for 3 targets, Soren said. Lennox and Sabine at the Tribeca loft. Jarrett Dane at his Midtown office, simultaneous execution scheduled. Miami, DEA tactical units operational. 17 Reyes syndicate locations. They'll move when we move. I checked my Patek Philippe X11 AM. Times Square link? I asked. Soren typed a command. His screen displayed a control interface with green status indicators. Operational boss. One key press initiates the feed. I walked to the desk and looked at both men. Hold until 11. Give them time to dress in their finest tailoring. Let them believe today is the day they inherit the earth. Thaddeus nodded slowly. Cruelty or mercy? Precision, I said. I returned to the window and watched the city wake. Traffic accumulated on FDR Drive. Lights blinked on in office towers. Somewhere 5 miles south in Tribeca, my son was probably still asleep, dreaming of empires he'd never inherit. The mathematics were simple. Lennox had approximately 4 hours and 47 minutes of freedom remaining. He'd sleep through his final dawn as a free man, unaware that federal agents were already reviewing tactical approaches to his loft, that his father had spent the night watching surveillance footage one last time, memorizing the exact timestamp when everything had broken. The hours crawled. At 8 a.m., Edna emerged from the bedroom and brought me toast I couldn't eat. At 9:30 a.m., Thaddeus received confirmation that all 3 arrest teams were in position. At 10:15 a.m., Senator Saxon sent an encrypted message. A G personally briefed FBI director, no interference possible now. At 10:30 a.m., Soren looked up from his laptop. Do you want me to mask the IP when I hack the Times Square control feed? He asked. I stared at him. Hack? He blinked. The display. We need to... I walked to the studies vault, entered the combination, and withdrew a 47-page document bound in black leather. I dropped it on the desk in front of Soren. Master Services Agreement, I said. Signed June 2019. Sterling Empire pays Daktronics Incorporated $12 million annually for 4 exclusive promotional slots on the Times Square display. We own the airtime. Soren opened the contract, slowly scanning the signatures and terms. Just call the master control engineer, I continued. Tell him to run slot 1147. It's already paid for. Thaddeus leaned back in his chair, a faint smile crossing his face. Some men buy revenge impulsively, acting on raw emotion and immediate fury. Stanley Reed had purchased the billboard 3 years before, knowing what message he'd eventually display. The feed, Soren asked quietly. I opened the master file on my laptop and turned the screen toward him. The timestamp read 4 minutes, 23 seconds. December 5th, surveillance footage, full audio. The moment Edna's degradation had been captured in perfect clarity, my cloned voice commanding unspeakable acts while my son and his wife watched. Confirm the uplink, I said. Soren typed rapidly. At 10:43 a.m. his phone rang. He answered, spoke briefly with the Daktronics master control engineer, and hung up. Confirmed, he said. Slot 1147, 4 minutes, 23 seconds. The file's queued. I clicked the final button on my laptop, confirm upload. The file transferred in 11 seconds. 8,000 square feet of LED screen, in the heart of Times Square, programmed to display evidence of elder abuse to approximately 300,000 pedestrians and every major news outlet with cameras pointed at that intersection. Not a hack, a legal contract, not vigilante justice, federal coordination, not revenge, precision. Thaddeus closed his laptop. There's no stopping it now. There was never any intention to stop it, I said. At 10:58 a.m., my iPhone vibrated. A notification from the security feed I'd installed in the Tribeca Loft's hallway. Completely legal building common area, disclosed to all residents. I opened the live stream. Lennox stood in front of a full-length mirror adjusting a navy Tom Ford suit. Behind him, Sabine Clara smoothed her charcoal Armani blazer, checking her reflection with the practiced precision of someone who'd reconstructed her entire face to execute a 15-year plan. They were smiling. Lennox said something I couldn't hear through the feed. Clara laughed, kissed his cheek, straightened his tie. They believed today was the day they'd seize my empire, that the legal strategies they'd prepared, the evidence they'd manufactured, the deepfake torture they'd orchestrated, all of it would culminate in my destruction and their inheritance. I checked my Patek Philippe, 10:58 a.m., 49 minutes until the Times Square broadcast began, 62 minutes until federal agents knocked on their door. I watched them dress for their own arrests and felt absolutely nothing. The elevator doors opened at 11 a.m. sharp, and my son stepped into the penthouse wearing the navy Tom Ford suit I'd bought him for his 30th birthday, believing he was about to inherit an empire he'd already tried to steal. Sabine Clara followed half a step behind charcoal Armani, blazer, buttoned precisely, her reconstructed face composed into professional confidence. They'd spent the morning dressing for conquest, rehearsing legal arguments, believing the fake Nevada documents would be their first step towards seizing control. 4 stories below, 3 unmarked federal SUVs pulled to the curb simultaneously. I stood in the center of the living room, hands in my pockets, watching them cross the threshold. Thaddeus sat motionless near the fireplace, his laptop closed. The penthouse was silent except for the hum of the climate control system. Sabine entered first, her eyes immediately searching for the document folder that didn't exist. "Where's the Nevada paperwork, Stanley?" she asked. "Lennox wants to review before signing." I looked at her without expression. "There is no Nevada paperwork. There never was." Lennox stopped mid-step, his face shifting from confusion to calculation. His eyes met mine, and something passed between us that had never existed in 38 years of father and son. He wasn't looking at the man who'd taught him to ride a bicycle, or paid for Princeton, or given him the Patek Philippe watch currently on his wrist. He was looking at the ledger. For the first time in his life, Lennox saw the calculating billionaire who'd spent 3 decades building invisible networks, the man who'd consulted for the FBI in the 90s, the architect who purchased Times Square, billboard contracts 3 years before, knowing what message he'd display. He saw the thing that had destroyed Werner Voss and now stood ready to destroy his daughter. "Dad," Lennox whispered, "what did you do?" I checked my Patek Philippe. 11:03 a.m. 44 minutes, I said quietly. "That's how long you have before you understand." Sabine's hand moved toward her phone. Thaddeus stood smoothly, crossing the room to position himself between her and the exit. "Federal agents are already in the building," Thaddeus said. "Service entrance lobby basement. You can wait here, or you can wait in handcuffs. The outcome is identical." The minutes crawled. Lennox sat on the couch, his hands trembling. Sabine stood rigid near the window, her professional mask beginning to crack. I watched the clock counting down. 11:47 a.m. arrived like a detonation. My phone vibrated with notifications, first one, then dozens, then hundreds. The Times Square feed had gone live. At 11:47:23 a.m., the 18-meter LED screen cut from a luxury car commercial to display the first frame Edna Reed, 68-year-old blind concert pianist, crawling on our marble floor, reaching for water that Sabine moved 3 feet farther away every 30 seconds. 4 minutes and 23 seconds of unedited surveillance footage, my cloned voice echoing through the penthouse speaker's commands. I'd never spoken degradation. I'd never imagined torture administered with champagne in one hand and iPhone in the other. Sabine grinning, Lennox nodding, Edna collapsing. Within 90 seconds, my phone showed #ReadBetrayal, hitting #1 worldwide. 300,000 pedestrians in Times Square watching. Every major news outlet cutting to the feed. Lennox's holding company stock dropping 94% in 4 minutes. Sabine turned from the window, her face ashen. "You knew," she whispered. "You knew who I was the entire time." "Clara Voss," I said, "daughter of Werner Voss. Stuttgart. 2008 Atlantic City bankruptcy. Your father's suicide in 2009. Your facial reconstruction in 2010. 15 years of hunting me." Her legs gave out. She sat down hard on the floor, her Armani blazer crumpling. The elevator chimed at 11:52 a.m. 4 federal agents stepped into the penthouse, badges, visible handcuffs ready. The lead agent approached Lennox, who stood slowly, his face drained of color. "Lennox Reed," the agent said, producing a document. "You're under arrest for wire fraud, elder abuse conspiracy, and RICO predicate. Acts. You have the right to remain silent." I watched steel handcuffs close around Lennox's wrists at 11:52 a.m. and calculated the mathematics. 44 years of fatherhood, 11 months of investigation, 54 minutes of execution. An entire relationship reduced to 4 minutes and 23 seconds of footage displayed across 8,000 square feet of LED screen. The second agent moved to Sabine. Clara Voss, also known as Sabine Reed. She didn't resist. She simply stared at me as the handcuffs clicked shut, her reconstructed face expressionless. My phone buzzed with updates. Jarrett had been arrested at his law firm at 11:49 a.m. 3. federal agents walking him out through the marble lobby while clients watched. In Miami DEA, tactical units had breached the Wynwood warehouse at 11:47 sharp, simultaneous raids across 17 Reyes Syndicate locations. The ledger had closed across 3 jurisdictions simultaneously. The agents led Lennox and Clara toward the elevator. At the threshold, Lennox turned back, his eyes finding mine. The handcuffs caught the light. The Navy Tom Ford suit, my gift, looked suddenly ridiculous on a man being led to federal detention. Through that moment, 38 years vanished. The calculating conspirator disappeared, replaced by something older and smaller. A 7-year-old boy in Prospect Park knee, torn open blood on pavement, looking up at his father with a single question. Are you proud of me now, Dad? He didn't say it aloud, but I saw it in his eyes before the agents turned him toward the elevator. I turned my head before he could see my tears. The elevator doors closed at 11:54 a.m. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I watched the federal vehicles pull away down Fifth Avenue, disappearing into December traffic. My son was gone. My daughter-in-law, my enemy's daughter, was gone. The man who'd sold me out for $47 million was gone. I'd won everything. I'd lost everything. At 11:56 a.m., Edna emerged from the master bedroom. She'd been listening, I realized, hearing every word, every handcuff click, every elevator chime. She walked slowly to the windows and placed her palm against the glass, staring south toward Times Square, 4 miles away, where her humiliation still looped on 300,000 tourist iPhone screens. I expected tears, rage, something. Instead, she turned her eyes clear and steady. Now you understand what I sacrificed, she said quietly. Tomorrow, I tell you what I'm taking back. She returned to the bedroom and closed the door. I stood alone in the penthouse, watching Manhattan move forward without caring that my family had just been dismantled on federal warrants and 8,000 square feet of public LED screen. Victory tasted like ash. The FBI special agent led me behind the two-way mirror at 3 p.m. to watch my personal lawyer's interrogation, and within 11 minutes, I learned my son wasn't just robbed. He was cuckolded for 7 years by the 2 people he trusted most. Edna had stayed in the bedroom all morning. I'd waited for her ultimatum, but she never emerged. At 2:30 p.m., the FBI had called requesting my presence at 26 Federal Plaza for witness observation. I'd left without knocking on her door. Now I stood in a small observation room watching Jarrett through one-way glass. He sat at a metal table in a gray suit that had cost more than most people's monthly salary. His hands folded, his expression carefully, neutral. 2 FBI agents sat across from him, a voice recorder between them. Mr. Dane, the lead agent said, walk us through your relationship with Sabine Reed. Jarrett was silent for a moment, then sighed. Sabine and I have been together 7 years, he said quietly. Started when she was a junior associate at Sullivan and Cromwell. I was a primary institutional client. We began an affair in 2016. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. When did Lennox Reed enter the picture, the agent asked. 2019. Sabine identified him as the optimal vehicle. Son of Stanley Reed, heir to a $2 billion casino empire, no sophisticated financial oversight, emotionally vulnerable after his mother's health decline. Jarrett's voice was clinical, as if describing a merger acquisition. She engineered their first meeting at the Guggenheim, made it appear accidental. Lennox believed it was fate, and the marriage, completely strategic. The prenuptial agreement included a clause after 2 years of marriage-divorce settlement would grant her 60% of marital assets. We planned to wait exactly 24 months, file for divorce, liquidate approximately $1.2 billion, and relocate to Monaco. The second agent leaned forward. Mr. Reed Lennox was unaware of your ongoing relationship with his wife. Completely. Jarrett's expression didn't change. He never suspected either betrayal, the financial exploitation or the personal one. I watched through the glass, my hands gripping the edge of the observation desk. Which wound would cut deeper for my son, losing $2 billion, or learning the woman who called him darling every morning had been sleeping with his personal attorney for their entire relationship? The deepfake operation, the agent continued. Whose idea? Sabine's. She needed Stanley Reed neutralized before we could extract the assets. The torture was designed to create leverage evidence of elder abuse that would force Stanley into settlement rather than public trial. She underestimated him. The agent made a note. You attended the wedding, gave the toast. Yes. What did you feel toasting a marriage you knew was fraudulent? Jarrett looked directly at the one-way mirror as if he could see me standing there. Nothing, he said. I felt nothing. I turned away from the glass. The FBI agent who'd escorted me stood near the door. We'll need your son's statement eventually, she said quietly. He's a victim in this too. I know, I whispered. I left Federal Plaza at 4:45 p.m. and returned to the penthouse. Edna's bedroom door was still closed. I went to my study and sat at the desk, staring at nothing. At 5 p.m., my tablet buzzed with a news alert. New York Times, front page. The headline read, "The Dane Network, How One Elite Estate Attorney Defrauded 5 Vulnerable Families Over 6 Years." The byline, Queenie Pool. I'd met Queenie 6 weeks ago when Thaddeus had suggested controlled media disclosure. She was 43, a New York Times investigative journalist who'd spent a decade exposing white-collar crime. Sharp, relentless, ethical. I'd given her verified documentation on the condition that she protect Edna's medical privacy. She'd done more than report my story. She'd found the pattern. I read slowly. The article opened with the Times Square broadcast, then expanded. 3 other high society families had come forward within hours of seeing the footage. The Harringtons' $3.2 million in estate fraud, the Prescotts' $1.8 million, the same case Judge Upshaw had mentioned, the Ashfords' $940,000, all elderly, all vulnerable, all systematically defrauded by Jarrett over 6 years. The article included court documents, forensic accounting witness statements. Queenie had cross-referenced probate filings across 3 states, identified shell corporations, traced offshore accounts. The New York State Bar had issued emergency suspension of Jarrett's license at 4:30 p.m. My phone showed the article's reach 2.3 million unique shares within 6 hours. The narrative had shifted from isolated family scandal to massive systemic fraud. I read the names of the 3 other families. Again, Harrington, Prescott, Ashford, and realized something fundamental had changed. My Times Square broadcast hadn't just exposed my own conspiracy. It had given other victims permission to speak. They wouldn't carry the shame alone anymore. I sent an encrypted message to Queenie. Thank you. You cured the disease I only intended to contain. Her response came within minutes. You gave them the platform. I just amplified it. Those families are grateful. I set the tablet down and looked out at Manhattan. Dusk was settling over the city lights, beginning to glow in office towers. Somewhere in federal detention, my son was learning that his marriage had been theater. His wife, a German industrialist's daughter, executing 15-year revenge. His lawyer, his wife's secret lover. Somewhere in the same building, Clara Voss sat, in a cell, her reconstructed face finally exposed. Somewhere in Miami, Rhea's syndicate members were being processed, while DEA accountants dismantled their empire. The ledger had closed perfectly. At 6:15 p.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. Mr. Reed, this is Dr. Helena Rourke. The voice was professional, careful. I'm your wife's oncologist at Mount Sinai. I've been managing her stage 4 glioblastoma since the diagnosis in March. My chest tightened. Is she? She's stable, Dr. Rourke said quickly, but she requested I contact you directly with 2 pieces of information. First, she's declined further chemotherapy treatment. Given her prognosis, this means she has approximately 8 to 12 weeks remaining. The room went silent except for the sound of my own breathing. Second, Dr. Rourke continued, she's requested consultation with an estate attorney regarding asset separation filing. She asked me to deliver a specific message to you. What message? I whispered. She said the ledger runs both ways. The line went dead. I sat in the study as darkness filled the windows, holding a phone that had just delivered my wife's declaration of war. I'd won everything today, and I was about to lose the only thing that mattered. At 7 p.m., I watched my CFO of 26 months collapse in Sterling Towers' executive suite. When Soren laid out the evidence, and I realized Edna wasn't the only person in my life I'd failed to protect, from the woman who studied my weaknesses like engineering blueprints. Dr. Rourke's call had ended at 6:15 p.m., with Edna's message still echoing, the ledger runs both ways. I'd sat in the study for 30 minutes staring at my phone before Soren had contacted me about the Marsden interrogation. I'd told him to proceed. I needed to see the full scope of the infiltration before I could face my wife. Now I sat in the penthouse watching the video feed from Sterling Towers' 35th floor. Marsden Myers stood in the executive conference room, his Princeton tie loosened, his face pale. Soren and Thaddeus sat across from him at the mahogany table. Laptops open, transaction logs displayed on the wall screen. $2 million, Soren said, his voice clinical. Delaware Shell Corporation. Meridian Advisory Solutions. LLC. 18 months of wire transfers, each one corresponding exactly to a weekly liquidity report you transmitted to an encrypted server registered to a Cayman entity. Marsden stared at the screen, his hands trembling. You replaced Marsden, Soren continued, 26 months ago, February 2022. We have the airline records, the hotel reservation, the conference registration. Miami. You attended a financial services conference, and someone approached you. Tell us who, Thaddeus said quietly. Marsden's face crumpled. Unlike Sabine's sociopathic armor or Jarrett's cold calculation, he had no defense mechanisms left. He simply broke. She approached me at the Fontainebleau, he whispered, February 16th, 2022. Said her name was Sarah Vaughn, that she was recruiting for a boutique consultancy. Said Lennox Reed needed a financial advisor, he could trust someone with institutional credibility. I thought, his voice cut, I thought it was legitimate headhunting. When did you realize it wasn't? I asked through the video link. Marsden looked at the camera, his eyes red-rimmed. 3 months in, July 2022, she contacted me again, different name, Sabine Reed. Said she was engaged to Lennox. Showed me copies of every transmission I'd sent, every report, every email. Said if I didn't continue, she'd provide documentation to the SEC showing I'd violated confidentiality agreements. I was trapped. Soren pulled up another file. You routed Sterling Empire's entire financial architecture to her for 26 months. Cash reserves, credit lines, asset liquidity, acquisition targets, vendor relationships. Everything she needed to know exactly when Stanley was vulnerable. She didn't just steal money, Thaddeus said quietly. She studied the load-bearing structures, financial and emotional. She mapped where Stanley's sentimentality lay, his devotion to Edna, his hope for Lennox, so she'd know exactly which beams to remove for total structural collapse. I watched Marsden weep on the video feed and felt something unexpected envy. He still got to believe his betrayal was coerced. He could carry the narrative of victimhood, claim he'd been blackmailed into compliance. I didn't have that luxury. My son had chosen the conspiracy, willingly had nodded, while his wife tortured his blind mother, had believed he deserved to inherit an empire he'd helped destroy. Marsden had been manipulated. Lennox had been willing. She understood my asset configuration better than my own flesh and blood. I said, my voice flat. She spent 26 months mapping every vulnerability, not just financial, but psychological. She discovered where my sentimentality created exposure and exploited it with surgical precision. I paused, watching Marsden's shoulders shake. If she'd directed that intellect toward building something real, I continued, she wouldn't be in a federal holding cell tonight. But revenge is easier than creation. Destruction requires less imagination than construction. I reached for the laptop and terminated the video transmission at 7:47 p.m. The screen went black. I sat in the study surrounded by the evidence of a 26-month infiltration that had penetrated every level of my empire. Marsden had been just one node. There were others, the junior analyst who'd started in April, the IT contractor who'd appeared in September, the executive assistant who'd joined in November. Sabine hadn't just planned a heist. She'd conducted an institutional audit mapping vulnerabilities with the precision of a forensic accountant preparing to dismantle a competitor. I'd spent 44 years building Sterling Empire. She'd studied it for 2 years and found every structural weakness. At 7:52 p.m., my phone vibrated. Encrypted text message. Unknown number. I opened it. Federal Holding doesn't have the same cell phone restrictions you think. Tell Edna I'm sorry about her diagnosis. Stage 4 glioblastoma is cruel. 8 to 12 weeks. At least she'll outlive your marriage. CV. I stared at the screen, my hands going cold. Sabine Clara Voss was texting from federal detention. She knew about Edna's chemotherapy refusal. She knew about the asset separation filing. She knew about the 8 to 12-week prognosis that Dr. Rourke had delivered less than 90 minutes ago. She was still playing, even from a federal holding cell, facing RICO charges, an elder abuse conspiracy. She was demonstrating that she had information I didn't access. I couldn't control leverage. I hadn't anticipated. I read the message again. At least she'll outlive your marriage. She wasn't just mocking me. She was telling me she understood something fundamental. I'd won the legal war and lost everything that mattered. Federal warrants, Times Square broadcasts, systemic exposés. All of it was Pyrrhic victory if Edna spent her final 8 weeks away from me. The ledger ran both ways. I destroyed Claire's 15-year revenge plot. She'd destroyed my 44-year marriage. I stood and walked to Edna's bedroom door. It was still closed. I raised my hand to knock, then stopped. What would I say? That I'd protected her by orchestrating public humiliation across Times Square. That I'd avenged her torture by sending our only son to federal prison that I'd won. I lowered my hand and returned to the study. Outside Manhattan glowed against December darkness. 8 million people living their lives unaware that on the 47th floor of this building, a billionaire sat alone watching his empire survive while his family disintegrated. Victory tasted like ash, and somewhere in federal detention, Claire Voss was smiling. My wife stood before 3 national reporters Wednesday morning in a sharp cobalt blue coat I'd never seen her wear, and for the first time in 44 years, I understood I'd been wrong about who was protecting whom. Sabine's text from Federal Holding had arrived Tuesday night at 7:52 p.m., mocking Edna's diagnosis and our marriage. I'd forwarded it to the FBI's Contraband Investigation Unit, then turned my phone off. By Wednesday morning, I'd made a decision I wouldn't fight Edna's ultimatum. Whatever she was taking back, she'd earned the right to take it. Now I stood in the shadows of the penthouse grand entry hall, watching my wife address the cameras. Both eyes were clear now. The surgical bruising faded to faint yellows and greens. She wore the cobalt blue coat over a gray dress. Her posture erect, her hands steady on the back of a dining chair she'd positioned for support. 3 reporters sat in front of her with recording equipment. I'd offered to speak. She'd refused. I do not stand before you as a victim, Edna said, her voice clear and unwavering. I stand as a survivor. What occurred in this home happens to thousands of elder citizens, yearly people without my husband's wealth to fight back, without his connections to mobilize federal resources, without his capacity to wage legal war. She paused, her gaze moving across each reporter's face. We are transforming our entire estate structure, she continued. Every dollar we possess will become a shield, ensuring their battles are fought for them. Elder, abuse protection, legal representation, medical advocacy, financial oversight. No family should carry this shame alone. No victim should remain silent because they lack resources to speak. I watched her command that room, eyes clear and unblinking, and realized I'd always assumed I was the fortress protecting her. I was wrong. She was the anchor holding me to earth while I built empires in the air. Her strength hadn't been passive endurance. It had been deliberate gravity, keeping me tethered to what mattered. The reporters asked questions. She answered each one with surgical precision. When they asked about Lennox, her voice didn't waver. He is my son. He made choices that harmed me. Both statements are true. Both will remain true regardless of sentencing. When they asked about me, she looked directly at where I stood in the shadows. My husband, she said quietly, built the machinery to stop them. I'm building the infrastructure to protect everyone they would have harmed next. The press conference ended at 11:30 a.m. The reporters left. Edna returned to the bedroom without speaking to me. Thursday afternoon at 2 p.m., I sat in the back row of the U.S. District Court on Pearl Street, wearing an ordinary navy sweater, unrecognized by the press, who'd spent a week plastering my face across every outlet. Jarrett sat at the defense table in a gray suit that hung loose on his frame. He'd aged 2 decades in the week since his arrest. The court clerk read the charges in formal monotone, 22 federal counts, including conspiracy to commit wire fraud, interstate transportation of stolen property, breach of fiduciary duty, under Title 18, Section 1343, facilitation of elder exploitation, total revocation of license to practice law, all jurisdictions effective immediately. I watched Jarrett's shoulders slump as each count was read. I remembered a dinner in 1998 where he'd held infant Lennox, called him Little Prince, promised to help guide him toward wise decisions. Now the prince was in federal custody awaiting his own arraignment, and the advisor's law license was globally revoked. Jarrett's eyes scanned the courtroom during a procedural pause. They found mine from the defense table. We looked at each other for perhaps 3 seconds. I didn't nod, didn't look away. Simply watched him understand that I was there to witness, not to gloat. He turned back to face the judge. That is how 22 years of history ends. Not with argument or explanation or reconciliation, with silence and a federal docket number. I left the courthouse at 3:15 p.m. and returned to the penthouse, At 8 p.m. Thursday evening, I found Joyce in the kitchen, wiping down the counters as she'd done every evening for 19 years. I carried a heavy linen envelope. "Joyce," I said, "sit down." She looked at me with the same cautious expression she'd worn since September, when Sabine had threatened her with deportation. I slid the envelope across the counter. "Open it," I said. Her hands trembled as she broke the seal. Inside, a fully executed federally stamped H-1B visa adjustment guaranteeing 10-year lawful residency, path to citizenship. Beneath it, a certified corporate check. Joyce stared at the check. $250,000. "This represents your 19-year loyalty allocation," I said quietly. "The remainder is anchored in my final probate revisions. You'll never work another day unless you choose to. The visa means the deportation shadow is gone. You're free." She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. Not from the money, from the dissolution of fear she'd carried for 19 years. The constant calculation of whether speaking truth would mean ICE agents at her door, whether protecting Edna would cost her everything. "Thank you," she whispered. I walked out of the kitchen, thinking, across everything I engineered over 11 days, federal warrants. Times Square broadcast $2 billion in legal architecture, systematic exposure of elite fraud networks. This single envelope is what I'm most proud of writing. Joyce had been the most vulnerable person in my household, and I'd waited until catastrophe to protect her. The ledger ran both ways. I'd spent 11 months calculating revenge against blood, but a single stroke of pen protecting a housekeeper from deportation required no calculation, only conscience. At 9 p.m., my phone buzzed with an encrypted email from Thaddeus. Subject line, "Edna's filing." I opened it. Edna filed formal asset separation petition this afternoon, 4:47 p.m. She's not requesting division. She's requesting full transfer of your 23 Manhattan properties, valued at $840 million, into an irrevocable elder protection trust with her as sole trustee. You have 72 hours to contest. She's taking the empire and turning it into the shield she promised on camera. Attached legal filing, 147 pages. I opened the PDF and began reading. Every property I'd acquired over 40 years, the Tribeca warehouse conversions, the Upper West Side brownstones, the Midtown commercial towers itemized with surgical precision, transfer clauses, trust provisions, beneficiary structures designed to fund elder abuse prevention in perpetuity. She wasn't taking my wealth to punish me. She was taking it to finish what I'd started. And I had 72 hours to decide whether to fight the woman who'd endured torture while I built the machinery to avenge her. I drove to Brooklyn Metropolitan Detention Center Saturday morning to fulfill the only promise Edna asked of me: visit our son before sentencing and look him in the eye so he knows his father still exists beneath the machinery. I'd spent Friday night reading Edna's 147-page trust filing. By 3 a.m. Saturday, I'd decided I wouldn't contest it. If she wanted to transform my properties into the shield, she'd promised she'd earned that right. Now, I sat in a secure visitation stall at Brooklyn MDC, separated from my son by reinforced glass. Lennox wore orange prison issue, his Brioni suits stripped away. His hair was uncombed, his face pale, his hands shackled. "Did you know about Sabine and Jarrett?" he asked. "The 7 years." "I did," I said. He stared at his shackled hands. "How long before the arrest?" 4 days. Silence. Then, "I'm sorry about Mom." "I know." He looked up, eyes meeting mine through the glass. "Do you believe that?" "I believe you're sorry you were caught," I said quietly. "Whether you're sorry for the act itself, only you know that." His jaw tightened. He looked away, then back. "Dad," he whispered, voice breaking. "Am I actually your son?" I went very still. "What?" "She told me before the arrest. Sabine said you weren't sure, that Mom had doubts in 1985, that there was someone else, and you never confirmed paternity because it was easier to pretend." His eyes were hollow. "Is that true?" I leaned close to the glass. "You are my son," I said. "My blood. Nothing on earth can rewrite that. Sabine planted that seed to destroy you from the inside, one more weapon to dismantle your identity even after the conspiracy collapsed. Don't let her win that battle, too." Lennox stared at me, then buried his face in his shackled hands. His shoulders shook. He wasn't crying for lost billions or federal penitentiary. He was crying for the father he thought he'd lost. I pressed my palm against the glass. He didn't look up. The guard called time at 11:23 a.m. I stood watching my son try to compose himself. He looked up once more, face wet. I don't know if I'll ever forgive you, he said. I know, I replied, but you'll survive this. You're stronger than you think. I walked out into December cold and drove south through neighborhoods I hadn't seen in decades. At the corner of Atlantic and Flatbush, I pulled over and stared at a bodega that used to be a newsstand. My father had collapsed on this corner in 1987. Heart attack, age 43. Casino floor manager making $47,000 a year. I was 9 years old. I'd built a $2 billion empire from that moment, proving I'd never be vulnerable the way he'd been. Today I'd watched my son vanish into the same concrete that had swallowed my father. Monday afternoon at 2 p.m. I sat in the back row of Manhattan Federal Courthouse's ceremonial courtroom. The room was packed. Reporters, victim families, federal observers, Senator Saxon in the third row. Edna sat in the front alone. Judge Lowell Upshaw entered at 2:07 p.m. The bailiff called order. One by one, defendants were brought forward. Marsden Myers, first 5 years federal penitentiary, plus $4 million in restitution to victims identified in the Times expose. Jarrett, next 15 years plus total asset forfeiture. Sabine Clara Voss, third 18 years without possibility of parole for masterminding fraud, witness intimidation, evidence tampering. She stood perfectly still as the sentence was read, her reconstructed face expressionless. When marshals led her away, she looked directly at me. No smile, no glare, just cold calculation, already planning her next move from inside federal prison. Finally, Lennox. Judge Upshaw looked at him for a long moment. Lennox Reed, he said, you are hereby sentenced to 12 years in federal penitentiary for organized elder exploitation and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. You will serve this sentence at a facility to be determined by the Bureau of Prisons with eligibility for supervised release pending behavioral review. The gavel fell. I kept my eyes locked on a fixed notch in the mahogany paneling, tracking my breath. In, out. The mechanics of staying upright while your family disintegrates in front of federal witnesses. Does 12 years in federal penitentiary teach a 38-year-old man accountability, or does it just turn him into a 50-year-old stranger who will never forgive his father? Marshals moved to escort Lennox through the rear doors. He turned his head for one final look. Our eyes met across the crowded room. I didn't know what he saw in my face. I hoped he saw beneath the ice of the ledger his father still there, broken but breathing. Hoped he understood why I'd had to break him to save what remained of our souls. Then he was gone. At 4:47 p.m., I stood on the courthouse steps preparing to leave. Reporters clustered near the entrance. I started down the stairs. Mr. Reed, I turned. Edna stood at the top of the steps surrounded by microphones. She didn't look at me, looked past me directly at the cameras. Effective immediately, she said, her voice clear and steady. I'm accepting sole trusteeship of the $840 million Elder Protection Trust. My husband has 24 hours to sign the transfer documents, or I will file for full marital dissolution and public asset litigation. She paused, her gaze finally meeting mine. Some ledgers require balancing, she said. She walked past me down the courthouse steps without another word, disappearing into a waiting car. Senator Saxon appeared at my elbow, her expression grim. She just declared war, she whispered, in front of 11 cameras. I watched Edna's car pull away into December traffic, carrying the woman I'd loved for 44 years, and failed to protect when it mattered most. I had 24 hours to decide whether to sign away $840 million or lose her entirely. The ledger ran both ways, and I was finally learning the cost of keeping it balanced. On Christmas morning, I woke to the quietest penthouse in 38 years. No decorations, no tree, no sun, and found my wife in the kitchen making tea for 3 people instead of the 40 we used to host. I'd signed Edna's trust transfer documents Tuesday evening at 6:47 p.m., 1 hour before her ultimatum expired. $840 million in Manhattan properties transferred to the Edna Reed Foundation, irrevocable. Thaddeus had witnessed my signature without comment. Edna had received the filing confirmation and said 2 words, thank you. Now it was Thursday, December 25th. Heavy snow blanketed the city beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. The penthouse was bare of its usual holiday extravagance. No garland, no lights, no catering staff setting up for corporate guests and political allies. Just 3 of us. Edna stood at the kitchen counter in a gray cardigan, pouring hot tea into simple ceramic mugs. Joyce moved quietly beside her, setting out bread and butter. I stood in the doorway, watching them work in comfortable silence. Sit, Edna said, without turning. I sat at the kitchen table. Joyce brought the tea, started to return to the counter. Joyce, I said, sit with us. 19 years is long enough to eat standing in the kitchen. She hesitated, looked at Edna. My wife pulled out the chair beside her and smiled. Joyce sat slowly, her hands folded in her lap, as if she still didn't believe she was allowed. We drank tea and ate bread while snow fell against the glass. No one spoke about the past 3 weeks. No one mentioned Lennox in Brooklyn MDC or Sabine in Federal Holding or the Times Square broadcast that had played on every news channel for days. We just sat together in protective silence. Edna rested her hand over mine. Next winter, she said quietly, we'll put up a tree again, start over. Next winter, I said, we'll build whatever you want. Joyce made a quiet remark about the snow, something about her childhood in Vermont. Edna laughed, a genuine, unforced sound I hadn't heard in months. I watched her face light up with simple joy and realized this was the exact thing I'd spent 11 days of hell protecting. Not $2 billion, not the Sterling logo or Manhattan Properties or Casino Empire, just this, her laughter, this kitchen, this winter morning. We spent Christmas Day in quiet healing. By evening, the city glowed with holiday lights through the snow, and I felt something I hadn't felt since early December's peace. Wednesday, December 31st. I sat in my attorney's office at 3 p.m. and signed my final testament. Victoria Prescott, the estate attorney who drafted the documents in early December, laid out the pages in silence. I read each clause carefully. The entire Sterling Empire, valued at approximately $2 billion, bound to the Edna Reed Foundation, establishing a permanent national legal fund, defending elderly citizens from familial manipulation, financial exploitation, and systemic abuse. Not a single cent to Lennox Reed, not a single cent to Sabine Reed, née Clara Voss. I watched Joyce sit at the master table for the first time in 19 years and remembered she'd witnessed everything. Every birthday celebration, every business argument, every conspiracy phone call. She'd been the invisible witness to the empire's entire rise and fall, never asking for anything until I finally gave her freedom. 2 codicils at the end. $500,000 to Joyce Delaney for courage that arrived late, which is infinitely better than courage never arriving at all. $1 million to Soren Callahan for choosing truth while the clock still mattered. I signed the final page at 4:23 p.m. Victoria Prescott witnessed, sealed the documents, and filed them with the court. It was done. At midnight, Edna and I stood on the penthouse terrace, watching fireworks erupt over Times Square. The city burned with light and sound, 8 million people celebrating the boundary between years. Do you have regrets, Stanley? Edna asked quietly. I looked at the burning sky. I regret never telling my boy I was proud of him, not for his achievements, or his Princeton degree, or his business acumen, just for existing, for being my son. I paused. If I'd spoken those words decades ago, perhaps the ledger would look different tonight. Edna squeezed my hand. Perhaps, she said, or perhaps he needed to fall this far to understand what mattered. Below us, the colossal Times Square LED screen, the same 18-meter display that had broadcast our family's betrayal. On December 16th, flickered as the commercial feed cut at midnight. For 3 seconds, the screen went dark. The new content appeared, the Edna Reed Foundation logo, followed by text in clean white letters. Protecting those who built everything, one family at a time. A phone number, a website, a permanent public service announcement that would run every hour, every day, transforming the infrastructure of exposure into infrastructure of protection. The same screen that had displayed our darkest moment now broadcast salvation for thousands. Baptism through fireproof that machinery built for revenge could be repurposed for redemption if you were willing to let go. It's beautiful, Edna whispered. I pulled her close. Joyce emerged onto the terrace with fresh tea, and the 3 of us watched Manhattan celebrate while snow began to fall again. At 12:01 a.m., my phone vibrated. Unknown number, single line of text. I'm proud of you too, Dad, even if you had to destroy me to learn how to say it. L. Sent from Brooklyn Metropolitan Detention Center. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then showed it to Edna. She read it, looked up at me with tears in her eyes, and took my hand. She said nothing. There was nothing to say. We stood together, watching the city burn with light, knowing some forgiveness takes 12 years to earn. But tonight, for the first time since December 5th, I would sleep without ledger calculations running through my mind. Tonight I was just a man on a terrace with his wife and a housekeeper who'd become family watching fire light up the sky over Manhattan. Sometimes protecting the ones you love requires you to burn everything you once built. And sometimes, just sometimes, that is enough. And to you listening to my story, remember this. A father's revenge can destroy everything he's trying to protect. I spent 11 months building legal machinery to destroy my son and his conspirators, federal arrests, Times Square broadcast systematic exposure. But I almost lost my wife. Don't make my mistake. Don't let rage consume you so completely that you forget why you started fighting. The lesson I learned is that protecting the vulnerable isn't just about punishing their tormentors. It's about being present. It's about saying the words that matter while you still have time. I never told my son I was proud of him. Now he's serving 12 years in federal prison. I believe God put me through this for a reason, to show other families that elder abuse thrives in silence, and that sometimes the cost of victory exceeds the cost of loss. The foundation Edna built for my empire will protect thousands. That's redemption I don't deserve, but will spend my remaining years earning. If this story moved you, please leave a comment. Tell me, was this father's revenge justified, or did I destroy my family for nothing? If you know someone facing elder abuse, share this story. They need to know they're not alone. And if you want more stories of families fighting back, please subscribe to Father's Vengeance. Your support helps us reach the families who need these messages most. Thank you for staying until the very end. Some details in this story have been fictionalized for emotional impact and storytelling, but the core message, protecting those who can't protect themselves, remains true. God bless you, and may you never face the impossible choices I faced.